They're going to be able to hear me here in a minute, right? In a second. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome, Midwest GameFest gamers. It's Andi Dieckman with a new miniature painting session. I'm really excited for this one. I love dragons so much, and so I thought this would be kind of a fun one. And I'll tell you a little bit more about why I picked this particular miniature, but I want to give a shout out to Tabletop Miniatures for helping us put this together, run these sessions, and for helping provide these miniatures for me to be able to paint to you. And then a little bit later, we'll drop a link into the chat that will show where you can find this and the same or very, very similar colors of paints that I'm going to be using at Tabletop, and you can order those and have them shipped to you, and then you can rewatch the video and follow along if you don't have the Gold Dragon Wyrmling with you right now. And then also I wanted to say thank you to Dorky Dino for helping get me connected with Midwest Game Fest to be able to do these sessions for you all. So I'm really excited to be working both with Tabletop Miniatures and Midwest Game Fest. So, okay, so to get us started today, I want to talk a little bit about like how I've got my, what I've got set up for us. And like why I've kind of done that. I talked about this during the Owlbear session as well, so this will kind of be a repeat if anybody is watching this session. But I wanted to kind of go over, like, I usually have my waters out, and I usually have 2 things of waters, so that way, like, I usually have my waters out, and I usually have 2 things of waters, so that way a little bit better while you're painting, and so that's what I typically do as well. I've got my paper towel here in case I need to dab anything off or dry my paintbrushes or anything like that. I have my different paintbrushes here. I've gotten a couple of these from Tabletop Gaming as well. They've worked great for me. Got a small brush here that has like a nice fine point to it, and then one that's a little bit bigger, so it'll hold a little bit more paint for me. And then these are just a couple I just have had on hand for a while. One of them is much bigger than the ones that I use on a regular basis, because this one I usually use for like putting the base coat on miniatures and things like that. So, all right, I'll be going back and forth through those. And then just to kind of go over the paints that I'm going to be using for this gold dragon today, the link that's going to be posted later, hi Dorky Dino, the link that's going to be posted later will have these colors on there too. But in case you are trying to use your own colors at home, if you already have paints, I'll tell you what paints I am using, so that way you can go grab those from your stash if you need to. So some things that I'm going to be using are this like series of colors here. Let me move this aside for a second. I have got like a darker red color, or if you have a really dark orange, that would be fine as well. This particular one is called Cinnamon Red. Scarlet Red, which is something that Tabletop has, works just as well too, but some kind of dark color that will go well with our orange and yellows. And then I have got a little bit lighter of a color, so this orange undertone to go with our gold. This particular one is Sunrise Orange. You could also get Fire Orange or anything that's kind of similar to that. That would just be a little lighter than our darkest color. And then I have 2 yellow colors here. One is a bit of a darker yellow color. Honestly, don't even know how to say this. Uriel Yellow from Citadel is the one I'm going to use. But there is lots of other really good colors out there. A golden yellow or something like that works really, really well. This is just what I happen to have that matched up well with what Tabletop has. Works out great. And then I'm going to use a really light yellow color. So this particular one is called Gold Highlight. A lemon yellow is also a really good color, just something that's going to be really light and give us a good highlight. So those are going to be our main colors for our dragon. And then I also have a linen white, so just a general white. I usually like a white that's slightly off-white and not necessarily a pure white, but you can absolutely use whatever kind of white you like. I do have a darker color for some of our nooks and crannies that we're going to be looking at painting later, and also our base. My particular dark color is blue liner. I really, really like blue liner, and I talked about it a lot during Owlbears if you were part of that one. So this is the dark color I use. You might use black, and that's okay. Anything like that is absolutely fine. Then the last colors that I'm going to be using, because this miniature comes with a little pile of treasure, I also put down some metallic colors. And so this one's an aged pewter, but just kind of a color. I kind of like the darker silvers. And then a coppery orange color. And then a just general gold, a nice shiny gold color. So I've got those that work really well for the treasure piece, and I have a sample of that for when we get to that point to paint that treasure. So those are the colors that I'm going to be using today on the miniature. And although I did paint a tester miniature just to make sure everything worked well together and things like that, I wanted to be sure I opened my package that we're going to be painting today together, because I wanted you to know and that I am not priming this miniature. So this miniature from WizKids that I got through Tabletop is already primed. So this plastic is already a good primer in itself. And so I do not prime these plastic miniatures. Sometimes when you do, they get kind of thick and they get tacky, and so it doesn't always turn out very well. And really, it holds paint on it just fine, so I'm not really worried about priming it. All right, I'm gonna throw these outer bits away. It does come with a nice base for it to sit on, and you can glue it that way. You can hold it a little better. But kind of like I had mentioned to people when I was painting my owlbear, I like to put my miniature on something else when I'm painting it, and so something a little bigger that's going to be easier to hold in my hand instead of just my fingers trying to rotate it. And so I have here just a Tropicana lid. I have used little gum containers before and things like that. The miniatures stick really well on there. When you use these like smooth plastic tops, you can either use like a putty, like a, I forgot the word, poster putty. You can use a poster putty and it works perfectly fine. You just stick it right on your lid, push it down there, squeeze your miniature onto it, give it a good pressure on there, and then there we go, stuck right on there. If you prefer, or if you're worried about the putty at all, or you tend to get paint on the putty and you don't like that, or you just don't have access to putty, you can also, on a smoother surface, use just super glue. And so this guy has been super glued on here, and he stays really well. And then when I'm done with him and ready for him to come off, all I have to do is give him a little push, and he pops right off there for me. So super easy there. If you just have super glue on hand, you can use that as well. So whatever works best for you, however you feel comfortable holding it. If you feel fine just holding it between your fingers while you paint, that is okay as well. The problem I have a lot of times when I do that is that and actually you can see where I was holding this guy, and some of the paint has come off on his face there because I was holding it between my fingers. And so sometimes your paint will kind of rub off if you haven't sealed it when you're holding it between your fingers. And then if you have a place that's already completely done, it kind of sucks that you've lost that paint now and you got to go back and redo it. So anyway, something to put it on. It works out really nicely. I am going to be just using a regular paper plate for my paint palette, just because it's what I've got around the house, and I didn't feel like looking for my tray. But you can absolutely use a plastic tray or whatever you've got that you can put paint on. Okay, so I'm gonna put the 3 pieces that came into this. We're gonna work on the dragon itself first. So I'm gonna put his little treasure pile and his flames to the side over here, and we will work on those later. So to get started on my my dragon here, I know I'm gonna make him a goldish color. So I really want to use these light colors when I work on him. And so a lot of minutes I will start out with my blue liner to give them a good full coat. But with lighter colors like the yellow and a lot of times cream colors or white colors, it's not a great starting point to start so dark. And actually, when I was trying this guy out, I actually did not like starting out with the blue. So we're not going to do that. We are instead going to start out with my cinnamon red or whatever darker orange-ish red color that you have. All right. I'm going to check the chat, just make sure we don't have anything. Lots of chats going on, though. That's awesome. All right. So I'm getting my red color out here, and I'm being pretty generous on my palette with putting that red out, because I know I'm going to be coating my entire dragon with that red. It's a medium brush as well. Work just fine. So I'm going to, I've got my little plot of paint here. I'm going to fill my brush, my clean brush, up with clean water and put some drips of water onto my palette here, because I want this base coat to not be like globbed on. I don't want it to be thick paint. I want it to be thinner paint that's really going to fill my creases more so than cover the top of my miniature. I want to use this red color for my gold dragon as highlight or underlights. What is the coffee for today? I have a vanilla energy drink today for my coffee. Nothing fancy. Okay. Uh-oh. Okay, that's right. I'm not sure what part we got cut off on, so sorry about that, you guys, but So we are mixing water, clean water, with our red paint, and going to be applying that onto our gold dragon as his first layer, his base coat. And that way, this red color will give us some really nice underlights, some lowlights under his shadowed areas when we go to apply the much lighter colors later. All right. All right, so when you're applying your base coat, which it is kind of still thick. I might actually add some more water because this is going on thicker than I actually wanted it to, which is not a problem. That's absolutely okay. It's easy to resolve. I'm just going to wash my brush off, get some more clean water into my brush, and drop that into my red here. There we go. Make it just a little bit thinner for me. And then go ahead and keep applying that. Okay, I'm liking that better. You can just kind of feel it out. If you get a little too much water, you might have some bubbles. You can go back with a clean brush and kind of go back over those. to make sure that they pop or they release. So that way you're not getting little spots and bubbles on your miniature. But when you're doing your base coat like this of your darker color that you're going to be using, you want to be sure that you cover all surfaces with this color that you're wanting to use. Now, I am not going to put this red. If I get any on the base, it's okay, but I'm not going to apply this red purposely to the base. I'm going to use my darker color for that. And so for right now, I'm going to, again, not purposely get it on my base, but if you get red on there, it's really not a big deal. The darker color that we're going to use, for me, it's the blue liner. For you, it might be black or a dark charcoal brown or something like that. Whatever it is that you're using for your very dark color, we're going to apply that, and it will cover the red, because the red that we are applying is thin enough that the darker color should have no problem covering it up. All right, I'm getting in between his toes. And I'm not being too cautious around the base. Like I said, I'm not super worried if it gets on there. So just applying that paint. Some of the spots for this particular miniature that you're going to want to look out for to make sure you get covered with your base coat is going to be his underbelly. He's got some ridges on his underbelly, so it can be an easy spot to miss. So I want to really make sure I get his underbelly. And the inside of his tail here can also be easy to miss some spots in there. So I want to make sure I'm getting all those spots in there as well, giving them a good coat. There we go. And then his hind quarters, where his back legs and his tail meet, also kind of a tricky spot. Oh, I can already see a spot on his tail that I have missed underneath. So this might be an instant where I'm going to go ahead and pop him off of here and then re-put him on here in a second, because his tail underneath was kind of hard to get to. So I'm going to paint back over that so I can more easily get there. There we go. Okay, I'll just go ahead and finish off his base coat while he's off the piece there, since I've got him. Some of those innards, his feet, between his toes, can also be pretty challenging to get to. Alright, I think I'm feeling pretty good about those pieces. So the biggest reason we want to do this base coat is so that when we put our lighter color on, hopefully he's got a pretty even coat of this color, and it's going to make our lighter colors look and feel a little darker and give us that shadow effect that we kind of want to have. And then as we layer, because we're going to be using lots of layers, as we layer on top of this, we will be sure to avoid the shadow areas so that they stay like a darker color. And we'll start applying his lighter colors to less and less areas to overlap those colors and make them lighter. Okay, I think I've got him pretty well here, but because I pulled him off, you can see on his wings where I was holding him that paint has come off there, and so it's you know, I'm gonna have to go back over those, but I'm gonna put him back on my base before I do that. So I'm gonna rinse my brush. So I did still have paint on my brush that I probably could have used to do that, but I want to take really good care of my brushes so that they last me longer. So if at any point that I plan to put down my brush that might be longer than just a couple of seconds, I usually tend to wash my brush. And you'll notice that I also didn't leave my brush in the water when I did that. I rinsed it, I dried it off, and then I laid it down next to me, because keeping your brush in the water can actually really damage your bristles a lot. So I do not like to leave my brushes in my water while I'm working. Well, at all, but okay. So you notice I moved the putty to the side a little bit. So I am kind of worried that maybe I won't be able to get to that tail later on while I'm continuing to paint. So by moving this putty to the side, or choosing to glue him if you're using glue to another area, there we go. Now, because I put him to the side, I can now see that bottom part of the tail a lot easier. So when I go back to apply more paint to it to put on my layers, I'll be able to get to that tail a lot easier now. And I just saw another spot underneath that I missed, right in between his legs on the far leg over there. Again, another hard spot to get to sometimes, so easy to miss. So while I'm working on these last little bits, just check your mini over if you're working on it with me. Check your mini over, see if you've missed any spots too, and just kind of give him a good even coat on there. There we go. Okay, I think I got his leg fixed up now. I'm gonna fix those wings where I was holding him. Fix that part. So he has, and again, my paint's a little thick. It's probably just drying. So I'm gonna clean that brush off, grab some clean water, get over to the side, just thin some of that out a little bit. There we go. I really mostly just need this paint to be in the creases of my dragon, so I'm not worried if some of the higher ends are white. That's okay. All right, clean that brush. All right, I'm feeling good about him. I think we have got a pretty good coat on him. Clean that brush off. There's a couple of places where I feel like I have some excess paint. So what I'm gonna do is take my clean brush that I have dried off fairly well, and I'm gonna run over some of those spots that I feel like there's just a little too much paint. It just seems a little heavy, and I don't want to lose any detail in my dragon with my base coat. So I'm just gonna touch up a couple of those places. See if I can pull up some of that paint. Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, I am liking that pretty well. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so we've got that base coat. We really got to let that dry before we decide to put any additional layers on it. Oh, I see a little crease here that I'm not liking how thick that is. There. Okay, there we go. All right. So we've got to let that dry because I don't want to start applying my lighter colors until that part is dry, so that my lighter colors can show through more. Some people do like to use the technique of wet blending, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I do like to do it sometimes as well, but I'll usually do it on smoother surfaces, on surfaces that have more ridges like this guy, and kind of have some more muscle structure. So you can really kind of see this guy's like his rib structure and his muscle structure in his legs really well. And then his belly has some really nice defined chest scales, which I really, really like. And then he has some great texture in his face as well, which we're really going to use later on. But I don't want to lose any of that, and I want to use that. So in order to use that in with dry brushing, which is a technique that I like to use a lot when I'm tabletop painting. So in order to do that, we do need him to be fully dry. So what I'm going to do while he is drying for us is I'm going to take my darker color and I'm going to go ahead and paint his base. I'm going to be slightly more careful than I was when I was painting him, his base coat for him. But again, it's not too terribly bad if you get this dark color on the miniature itself. It's not really going to hurt too much because we are going to layer a lot. And we can always go back over with some more red if we need to, or you never know, if you get it in a place that it really should be a darker area anyway, it might end up being okay and you may not have any problem with it. Okay, I am going to go ahead and continue to use this brush that I have been using for his base coat for on his body. However, this one brush that I got from Tabletop also works really, really great for this, going like into a base, like a smaller base. Especially if you have a critter with like claws and things like that, where you have to get between the toes. If you're not comfortable with your brush size, you really want to go down to a different brush. And you can always go back and forth, cover the bigger areas with the bigger brush, and then pull your other brush, your middle brush, and kind of have a little bit more control over putting those dark areas on. And actually his base is small enough, I might just go ahead and use my Tabletop medium-sized brush. I think that might actually be a good one to go ahead and use. Although I am going to use my bigger one to add water to my dark color here. Because just like the base coat on the dragon, I want my base coat on the base to be more thinner, kind of a thinner color that I'm applying. All right. Okay, so I've got my paint in my brush. It's a thinner, maybe not as thin as I'd like it to be. I might add a little bit more. Well, no, actually I think I'm okay. So I'm gonna just add this color in, be really a little more careful around his claws than I was being before. Make sure I get those edges of the base around that claw, around that foot. There we go. Just letting it seep into those creases between everything. Add a little in there. Just kind of push it around a little bit. The other good thing about adding the water to your paint when you're doing a base coat like this is that it's still fluid enough when you apply it that you can kind of push it around sometimes. So like if I get maybe a little bigger of puddle, like actually right here next to his claw, I have a little bigger of puddle of that dark color than I really actually want there. But because it's got enough water in it, I'm able to kind of pull that out and push it around and use that instead of having to keep going back to my tray and letting things kind of soak up together. There we go. Alright, there's part of that. Let me get underneath of him. There we go. Get around this side foot. So the way that WizKids has made some of these miniatures, their feet aren't completely solid, like fully solid on the ground of the base. So there's a lot of creases in between the foot itself and the base. And so you want to make sure you get some paint pushed up in those areas so that it hides any of that white from the original base color. So his back claw, I don't know how easy it is to see, but his back claw, I can actually fit a couple centimeters of my paintbrush underneath of that back claw. So I want to push up my paint into that area and be sure that I cover any white that might be underneath of that claw so that it looks like a good shadow. And that's probably the last bit of paint that I'm gonna use for underneath of there unless I see a white spot show up or something, just because I just need it to look like a shadow. I don't need anything fancy underneath of his feet. I just don't want to be there to be a glaring spot that stands out from everything else. Okay, so I'm happy with his base there. There's a few spots on the dragon head itself that I don't feel like are quite dry enough for me to go back and paint. But since I already have this dark color prepped, I'm going to actually go and add some of that to my treasure pile here as well. Now, before you get started on the treasure pile, I will say, depending on what colors you want to use to paint your treasure, might depend on what paints you want to use to cover the base of your treasure. And so if you're wanting to do like a more of a silver color, then I would probably say like a dark blue or a black is good for an undercoat. If you're wanting to do a gold color, I think you can kind of go either way. A blue would be okay, maybe a red or even an orange would be okay for an undercoat. For copper, the red is going to look really nice underneath there. Or if you're just kind of not sure yet, that's okay. You can always just put the dark color on it to give it a full shadow, and we can go back over it with any of these other colors that you think you might want to use as your base to put our metallics on top of for the treasure. So I am going to switch brushes since this one doesn't really matter. We're just getting a good coat on everything. All right. Kind of dab it in there, let it fill in those creases of everything. If you feel like the paint is clumping up, then you might need to add a little bit more water, because we really want this to just be a thin layer over top of everything. We don't necessarily need it to cover every single bit in this color. We just want it to fill in those creases so that it looks like a shadow for us later on. Alright. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and paint these guys. If you ever decide after we've done this that you don't like that color on the base coat, you can go back over and put a white on whatever area you think that needs to be lighter, or you think maybe needs to have a different base coat. We can go back through and put the white on it. And that's actually, I'm gonna go ahead and clean my brush. I feel like that's a pretty good coat on that, so right, clean that off. And that's actually what I ended up doing on this guy here. This crown, I really wanted to shine more than these other parts. And I wouldn't necessarily call this treasure pile finished, but but I really wanted this crown to shine more than the rest of this, so I ended up putting white on it, and then going back over it with gold, so that way it would shine more. But that's a decision that you can definitely make later. So we just want to get our base coat on that so that it can also dry, because it's going to be another one where we want it to be completely dry before we go to apply anything else to it. All right, back to our dragon here. I am thinking we are pretty set on, yeah, he looks pretty dry to me. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. So I am going to move on to my orange color. It's the one that's after the red or dark orange or whatever it is you used for your base coat. So it's going to be the next layer for me. All right, shake that up. Find me a new spot on my tray here. There we go. Actually, I do think I'm going to put this orange next to my red, because at some point I may, oops, just knocked my light. Sorry about that. At some point I may want this red and orange to blend a little bit. So if I put them next to each other, it'll be easier to be able to blend the two of them to kind of get a medium color if I need it later on. So I'm going to put them next to each other. There we go. All right. So this coat, similar to the red one, I am going to go ahead and apply everywhere as well. I'm not as worried about filling in the creases. I really kind of am more using this as a top layer to the red. But I also don't want my orange to be super thick because, again, I don't want to lose the detail on anything that I'm doing. So I am going to add some water to my orange color, but it's not going to be as much water. So I'm going to dry my brush off. It's not going to be as much water as what I added to the red. So starting out with less is better, and then having to add more water is better than doing too much water. So just kind of feel it out and feel how well it flows. And if it starts seeping into some of more of your cracks and leaving the top layers unpainted, then you probably have too much water and you want to add some paint. But if the paint is kind of looking blotchy, or it's just looking too thick and you're losing some of your detail, you might want to add some water to it so that it'll flow a little bit better. All right. Okay, looks like I guessed fairly well on the first go around. I'm actually pretty happy with the thinness of this paint. So, all right. So yeah, I'm just gonna give him a good go over. A medium or a slightly bigger brush works perfectly for this. We're not really trying for any detail specifics on this go around. We're just giving it a good coat. And there's a few areas that I'm not going to put too much concern into making sure they get covered, that are inside of some of the deep crevices of this miniature. So although I will try and get some paint onto his belly, if there's some red that ends up staying, as long as it's not glaringly obvious, I end up leaving it, just because it's a darker area, it's a hidden area that you wouldn't normally see, and it's gonna the red's gonna be our shadow for this type of thing. So, all right. Okay, and that side covered. I need to get most of his muscles and stuff on that side. I'm going to go up the wing now. The wing is also a really good indicator of how much water you have in your paint, because it has those lines in the wing, and if it's filling the creases between the lines and it's not really staying on the raised lines, then you probably have too much water and you'll want to add some more paint. I think my paint's drying up, so it's coming on a little thicker than I want it to be. Spread it around a little bit. How much easier that was to cover the bottom of the tail, now that I moved him around. Alright, I am going to wash my brush because I think that I might have just slightly thick paint, thicker than I want it to be, because I think it's drying a little bit. So I am going to go ahead and add some water to my orange. Give it off just a little bit of water and try again. Okay. All right. I'm gonna turn him a little bit. I'm gonna do this side. Start with the wing. See. Yeah, I think that's probably okay. All right. There we go. covering that wing. I'll cover his side here. I've got a few bubbles. They're pretty small, so you might not be able to see them on the camera, but there's a few little bubbles in here. So once I get done going over this first coat for my dragon, I'm going to go back over with a clean brush and try and get some of those bubbles out. So it might look like I'm being picky about where I'm placing this paint because I haven't really done his neck or anything yet, but I absolutely intend to do his neck. I just haven't got to that point yet. I'm just trying to make sure that where I have applied paint is well covered and looking kind of more like I want it to look. So I'm not necessarily purposely avoiding the neck and the head and all of that jazz, or the inside of the wings. I just haven't got there yet. So if you're ahead of me, feel free to go ahead and paint those this color as well. Same technique and everything. Something that you'll want to make sure and not forget is to try and reach between his legs on one side to be able to reach his legs on the other side, the back side of his legs. Or sometimes it might be easier to go down through the front. So when we're doing it right now, we're really just kind of applying the same color everywhere. So it's not too big a deal if you get paint on his front leg. Well, it's not a big deal at all. If you get paint on his front legs that you're trying to apply to the back legs, it's not a super big deal. But as we progress and we're wanting to still apply color to those back legs, and not apply it anywhere else, it'll be a little trickier, and we'll use a smaller paintbrush to be able to reach that back side there and get the paint applied to those. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm gonna do his tail inside here. Okay, this little curve on his tail that curves in, that can be a really tricky spot to reach or to make sure that it's covered. So take a second, just make sure you've got everywhere that you want to have covered with this color in there. I'm gonna clean my brush and touch on those bubbles that I was talking about in this wing, just to make sure that they don't cause me issues later. So I just cleaned my brush, dried it just a little bit, and I'm going back and just kind of dabbing at those bubbles to make sure they either pop or that I can pick them up. Those bubbles usually mean that maybe I used too much water, and or maybe I didn't let it sit long enough while I was stirring it before I started applying it. There's several different reasons that those bubbles could be. Not gonna lie, I'm not like very sciencey on that aspect, so I don't have like a scientific reason for you. It's just stuff that I've kind of experienced. Apply some more orange back in there where I dabbed that out. Okay, there we go. All right, back to his tail. Make sure I've got everything covered there. I'm feeling pretty good about that. That looks okay. All right, I'm gonna go to his inside wings. There we go. Alright, I'm just making sure I get a good coat there. Another area that can often be missed, and I do it too, it's like the tops, the ridges of different areas are a commonly missed thing on like the first go around. So just be sure that you're also doing that and getting the tops of those ridged areas where there's like a ledge. But then once you do that, be really careful, because you can kind of see that this just happened to me. I went through and did those ridges just to make sure that this whole thing on the top was also covered in this orange color. But now I have excess orange coming down my actual wing on both sides even. And so I don't want that to sit there, because I don't want it to be that thick. So now that I've touched on those tops, I'm going to go back and just brush off that excess so that my paintbrush can pick that back up. There we go. And then I'll turn it and do the same thing on the inside. There we go. Just pick up that extra paint. There we go. All right, that looks much better. All right, now the other side of that. Get his back. Don't forget his back. There we go. And then I can see where I missed pieces on the ridges of those wings. I'm just going to go back over it with this. There we go. All right. And then that also gave me the pooled up paint again on each of the sides. So I'll go back, brush over those to pull up that excess paint. There we go. All right. Oh, I need to do the inside. I forgot about that. There we go. There we are. Okay. All right, I've got his wings. I need to get his chest, his neck and chest area, and then his head. So his head, and actually I think I'm going to add just a tad bit more water to my paint, because I do feel like it's drying again. My house is very dry. So I'm going to add just a little bit more clean water. I cleaned my brush, dried it off again. I'm going to add some clean water back to my orange. Dab this dry a little bit, and then mix that together. Just to make sure it's staying wet and staying thinner-ish. I just don't want it to glob up on me. I want it to be able to flow over my miniature. Okay. So I've done that. I'm gonna dab off some excess water that I felt like it had. All right. So his head. I want to be really careful with his head, with the paint that I'm applying, because if you're applying the paint and it's too thick, you don't have enough water in it, it is really going to lose some of that detail. It's going to fill in those creases, and then you're not going to have that extra like fun scale looking pieces. So if you have your gold dragon, hopefully you can kind of see this. Actually, I might turn my light off because it might help you. No, maybe not. There's these little scales on his face that look really cool, and you can see his little teeth, and you can see these little tiny like horns on like his chin and his cheeks. And so I don't want to lose that detail. So I want to make sure that my orange is definitely thin enough when I go to apply this, that it's not seeping into those creases and losing that detail. So I'm going to go ahead and cover his whole face and underneath of his chin, down his little belly scales. There we go. Looking good, looking good. Okay. Get his other side. Make sure I'm getting his neck in there too. Get a little more paint on here. Okay, oh, it's a little too much paint. There you go. You'll notice that a lot of times I'll use my finger to wipe off some excess paint. That's a thing that I don't know why I do it. I just do. So don't feel like you need to do that. Use a paper towel. Alright, I'm going to get the back of his neck, and he's kind of got a little frill down the back side of his neck, so be sure you get both sides of it. Get that paint in there on both sides. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good about that. Alright, If you feel like any spot that you have done so far is a little more red than you would like it to be, or maybe you feel like maybe the coat that you put on it was a little too thin and you could use just a little bit more color, a little more of the orange color to it, that's absolutely fine to go back over it. I'm actually kind of feeling that way about this dragon's left side left side over here. And so I think I'm going to just take just a little bit of the paint, make sure it's not too thick, and then go back over that again, kind of bring up that orange color. So, and I can do this now because this was the first side. I think this was the first side. Anyway, it's dry. Because it's dry, I can go back over it and do this again, and it's gonna pick up more of that orange pigment than it had before, because with us watering down our paints when we're painting and using the layer technique, we are making our paint more translucent. And so it's going to show more of the undercolor, and the top color is just going to tint that undercolor rather than completely cover it up. And so that helps us with layering and kind of the illusion that something is darker than it really is. And that way we don't have to use 1,000 different paints that go across the color scale. We can kind of blend and layer them. And you'll notice that I haven't blended anything on my palette yet. I'm only using these colors and the translucent part of these colors to help bring out the blending in things. Okay, feeling pretty good about my orange coat on this guy. The inside wings are maybe a little redder than I want them to be. Actually, this side over here I think is a little redder, so maybe I'll just give that one more coat, but again, not too thick. There we go. All right, that's a little better. So when you first apply the paint, it probably looks a little brighter than some of the places that have dried that you painted. And that's just going to be the case. Like when it dries, it's going to get a little darker. And so so the places that have dried that you just feel like are just still too dark, you could put another coat on to lighten them up again. Okay, I am pretty satisfied with this guy and that coat on this guy. So yeah, I think I'm ready to move on to our next color. So most of him has dried because we've used a thin enough layer of paint. His inside here has not really dried yet. Oh, and I see a spot where I had some excess paint, so I'm going to pick that up. So you might just take a second, look your mini over, make sure there's no spots that you missed, and then also, are there any spots that are holding too much paint? All right, that looks good. I think I just had that one spot that had just a tad too much paint that it was holding. Everything else looks okay. All right. So this is going to need to dry just a little bit. I think most of him is dry because he's drying pretty quickly between the dry air in my house as well as us putting on a thin enough layer to help him dry quickly. Which is also kind of a nice thing about when you're layering, is that you can kind of control a little bit better the speed that your mini's drying at sometimes. All right, so the next color we're going to use is going to be moving into our yellows. So we don't want to use the lightest yellow just yet. I want to use our mid-toned yellow color after our orange. So just to kind of give you an idea of the differences that we're looking at in these colors. And that's a pretty stark difference between those two. So if you don't feel quite comfortable making that huge of a jump between the two colors, you can mix this yellow color with that orange color and get a blend between the two, apply that next, and then move on to this color, and that's absolutely fine. I am going to go ahead and move on to this color. And the biggest reason that I'm not too worried about the difference here is because I'm going to go back and do additional layers again later on. And so I really feel fine with going ahead and starting this this next color. So if you have the Citadel color that comes in this kind of a bottle, you can use it straight out of the bottle, and that's okay. It is slightly thinner than the Reaper paints are, but I still find it to be too thick for me. I still like to add a little bit of water to it. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and take some of that paint out of there with my paintbrush and add it to my palette. Get a couple of scoops, add that to my palette there. All right, that's what I'm going to use out of that one. Okay, brush off some of that excess paint and rinse my brush off. Make sure it's good and clean. There we go. And then add some water from my clean water. There we go. All right, I'm only doing a couple of drops because, again, I want to get less and less thin as I move throughout my paints. Because I want this paint to be captured on more of the top layer of the miniature rather than in the creases of the miniature. So I've added some water to help with flow, but I don't want to add too much because I don't want it to be as thin as like my base coat was. All right, I'm going to let some of this excess water out. Okay. My next steps that I'm going to do with this particular color is that I'm going to actually do just his regular skin. I am not going to do the insides of his wings yet. I want to see how the inside of his wings contrast well with this yellow color. And then something else I'm not going to do is his chest, because I really want the way I like to view dragons is that I really like their chests to be, these chest scales to be different and set apart from the rest of their scales. And so I'm planning on doing something more similar to this guy, where his chest is kind of more of a tanned kind of color. And I used the colors that I have here, everything that I showed you ahead of time, to kind of make this effect. And so so I'll show you when we get to that point. But this yellow color that I'm using was not part of that, so I will not be applying this yellow to his underbelly or to his wings here. I will apply it to this outside frontal piece where he kind of has like this well, it's not a bone, but like this outside piece up here, just not to the inside pieces just yet. And now that I've talked enough, I probably have a dry brush, so I'm going to rinse that off, dry that out. All right, there we go. And start with some fresh paint so that I don't just glob it up in a certain area. Okay. So while I'm applying this one, I do kind of want to talk about how I'm painting this miniature. So for those of you that you know, have painted before and possibly even entered some competitions and things, I'm not painting this guy to be competition ready. I am painting this guy for what's called tabletop ready. So when we get done painting this one, you should be able to have a baby gold dragon that you can put down in front of your players. And just like with my owl bear yesterday, my players will most likely befriend this critter rather than try and fight it. But at least a gold dragon is supposedly a good dragon, so. Alright. So I'm applying this yellow onto him, And you can see in some spots that there's still some of that orange coming through on here, and that is okay. I do not have a problem with that at all. I actually want that to kind of be the case. So, right. So I am going to apply this to his neck, but again, I am not going to go over those scales. And I just realized I didn't talk about like what brush I'm using, and I actually didn't change brushes like I had intended to do. I just kind of kept going with this brush. So I think I'll do that as soon as I finish up the paint with this one. I'm going to move to my thinner brush, not my thinnest brush, but my middle toned brush is what I'm going to use for this. When I get done with this part here. And actually I may wait for that so that when I do have my thinner brush, so that way I can kind of control more about like where my brush is going and where I'm painting, so that I'm not accidentally painting an area that I didn't mean to do. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna rinse this brush because it was getting pretty dry on the paint on it anyway. So I will rinse this off, make sure it's fairly well cleaned. There we go. All right, feel pretty good about that. All right, let's get changed over. Which one? This bigger brush here. Get it wet a little bit because it's been sitting there for a while. Apply some paint. It seems a little thick. All right, there we go. All right. Okay, I'm gonna go start working on the inside of this tail, but I'm being careful that I'm not getting it onto the little fan piece where the wing continues down. For those of you that are D&D fans, gold dragons have this their wings have this little fan that goes down all the way through their tail, and so I'm just trying to make sure I avoid that while I'm painting. And then I also want to avoid underneath of his tail where those little scales continue down as well. So just trying to make sure that I get a good mixture in between those. All right, so this is just a judgment call on my part, but I kind of see these little wing frills ending right about here on the tail, and then the tip of the tail is still going to be like the gold dragon tail piece. So I am going to paint just a little bit on the tip of his tail as just gold. And again, because I have moved my miniature out to the side of my hand grip that I'm using, I'm able to kind of see better the bottom piece of his tail to be able to paint the inside there. So that's been very helpful. I'm really glad that I moved that outside of the center. Okay, I'm gonna get some more paint because it's starting to kind of feel a little tacky. There we go. Alright, laying that on. There we go, avoiding the frill, avoiding the underside of the tail so that it can be the scales, the underscales. There we go. Okay. Alright, now I've got a little bit bigger of a surface that I can work with. Alright. My paint's getting tacky again, it feels like, so I'm going to, again, just add a little bit more water to it. I'm going to probably just start with a drop. There we go. Alright, so I just added a drop more water into my paint just because it felt like it wasn't flowing as easily as it was before. So if you're in a dry house or a dry building or anything like that, then you might have to keep an eye on that consistency, and you just kind of have to feel while you're painting how your paint is applying, and kind of watch it too. So if it starts to get kind of tacky, or your brush strokes don't look clean, they look like little strips kinda, then your paint might be too thick, and it's only holding on parts of your brush and it's drying on parts of your brush, and so it can kind of get the miniature looking blotchy. All right. Alright, I'm getting some bubbles in there again, so I'm just trying to push those out. There we go. Alright, grab some more paint. Make sure I don't have too much. Some of these areas. Alright, so I'm working on his legs. His legs have just a lot of muscles on them, so if you want to try and be like cautious of those and give them more depth, and you can kind of leave some of that orange that we have applied already onto them, kind of leave it on there, or leave it showing through the creases. That'll kind of help it kind of look like there's a little bit more depth to it. His toes can kind of be tricky to apply some paint onto. Don't be afraid about getting paint onto your base, because we can always go back over that base. Like, we only have that one coat that we originally started out with on that base, so don't feel like getting paint on there is the end of the world. We're totally okay. Go back to these back legs because I kind of avoided some of the harder areas. So I'm going to go back to those and apply onto his back legs this yellow color. And this yellow is, you know, well, it's yellow, so it's kind of going to be thinner. Besides the fact that we added paint or added water to it, the paint itself is just going to be lighter and more translucent, and show through the darker spots a little bit more, even without us having added water to it. So if you get a few spots where you're just like, oh man, that looks like it is just super really dark still and I don't like it, you can go back over. Once the yellow dries, then you can go back over and reapply the yellow. And just like we were talking about earlier with layering, that the second coat of that yellow is going to help make that bright color shine a little bit more. Your original pigment is going to show through a little bit more. It's really just like when you paint the walls in your house. You hardly ever use just one coat. Got to do a couple of coats to make it really look like the color you want it to be, especially when you're covering up another color. So again, I'm just kind of going back through and just checking up some of those other spots, and I'm not finished with everywhere else either. I just some of these spots just kind of bother me, so I just wanted to go back and touch them up now. Alright. I'm going to go up the front side of his wing here and just cover that front little bone piece. You absolutely don't have to do this. I just like the way it looks. I like to think it's just kind of a lighter color. It's a little different. The base of that front part right there is very muscly, like the rest of him. So I kind of like the idea that it's different than the rest of his wings. So I'm just putting on the layer of the yellow onto them. And if you, so I am still using my medium-sized brush to do those parts on his wing. However, they're pretty small. So if you don't feel comfortable with your medium-sized brush, if you don't feel like you have good brush control with it, that's okay. You can move over to your smaller brush. So you can cover this part with that even smaller brush. And maybe I was getting a little excited for myself here. I've already messed up that and put some of that yellow onto his wing. But it's okay. We're layering, so I can definitely go back and with some more orange. Or maybe I find that I want to add some yellow to it anyway, so we'll see what happens. Let's see what I like when I get to that point. Okay. Feeling okay over here. So let's move him back around. Oh, actually, you know, I say that. So here's the instance where we are going to have to reach this yellow color underneath of our miniature and hit the back legs, or the back side of these legs. And then the same on the other side. We're going to have to hit these two legs from the other side. So that way we make sure and get some yellow applied to them and they don't just look like a bright or I guess a dark color compared to the rest of the miniature. So I am going to be really careful. And again, if you don't feel like you have a good brush control and you're worried that you might touch his underbelly with it, please go ahead and shift over to that smaller brush if you feel like you need to. That is absolutely okay. Brush control can be a real key component when painting miniatures and how comfortable you are with different types of brushes. So just be sure that you feel comfortable with your brush and how you're using it. And I would say, at least for me, that how I hold my brush is also pretty important. And I tend to move my miniature more than I actually use my than I move my brush hand. I'll usually keep my brush hand in fairly similar positions, and I move the miniature around to accommodate what feels comfortable for my brush movements. So you might consider that as well if you feel like you're struggling with brush control, and see like how do you hold your brush? Is that comfortable? And then how do you move, or how should you move the miniature to make the miniature work for you, rather than you having to try and accommodate the miniature with your brush strokes. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go up his other wing here, kind of following the motion of his muscles in that part. Just kind of covering just that very front piece of it. I'll get closer to the inside in here. I haven't even touched down the center of his back with this yellow color yet. I'm gonna need to do that too. Can be a bit of a challenge. That's looking good. I'll do his neck here because I haven't even touched his neck. On the side. Again, just a reminder that I am being very careful around his chest scales because I do not want this yellow on those scales. Be careful around those. Okay, there we go. All right, feeling good about that. So as I look at his under his chin, I kind of see that his scales narrow, and he has we're just gonna call it skin, even though we know it's dragon scales. But he has some skin between his chest scales that come up through his neck and the bottom of his chin there. So I am going to apply this yellow to that part. And you know what? I'm not super confident with myself on that, so I am going to change to my tiniest brush for that particular part because I just want it to look good. Alright, so there's that brush. Some paint. I think I have to sneak. Maybe? Oh, nope, thought I had to sneeze. Sorry about that. Okay. So I'm going to just ever so carefully paint next to that line of under scales that goes up there. Oh, I think my paint's drying out on me again. Alright, that's okay. Just apply a little bit more water. So I'm going to get a different brush, get some clean water. Just do, there we go. Just a drop of water in it. And then mix that in. There we go. Okay, feeling good about that. Okay, make sure it's not too wet. Alright, back to it. Alright, I'll apply that there. Oh, there we go. That's flowing much better, much better. Edges. Go. Keep in mind if you're following along and you are wanting to do exactly what I'm doing, if you get paint on those chest scales, it's okay because we really have only used two colors on them. We've used the red color that we started with, and then we used that orange darker color as our second coat. Those are the only two things that are applied to that area. So if you get a little bit of yellow on there, just go back with the orange. Just dab it back on there. Fix you right up. Cover that right back up. Alright. I'm going to go back to my medium brush because I am going to move to the side of his head. And I'm okay with this getting on pretty much, yeah, like all of his head. So, alright. So, again though, he has got some great detail on his head. So, as you're applying, just be careful that it's not too thick because we really just don't want to lose that detail. He's just got some really, really pretty detail on his head. Apply it on the top of his head too. I'm getting some bubbles on there. I'm gonna have to come back and check on those when I kind of get done with this layer. That's okay. Alright, we're gonna get his other side of his head. There we go. Okay, we have a few bubbles. Just gonna pull those up. Make sure they're not causing too many issues for me later. Alright, now I'm gonna go back down the center of his back. Being a little careful that I don't hit the wings where I don't want the yellow. but not too much trouble if we get it on there. We can always fix it. So, all right, so center of the back, just going right down, just right down the middle there. There we go. This is another spot that I feel pretty comfortable with my brush control. But if at any point that you don't feel comfortable, please move to your thinner brush. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that. Although I do feel like there's some creases in here that maybe have just a little too much paint sitting in them. So I think I'm going to rinse my brush, dry it off. There we go. And then pull up some of that yellow. There we go. That's better. Okay. All right. I may end up putting another coat of yellow down his back there. But I really need to make sure that that dries before I do that, so that way it pops more. It gives it a better color. There's my little crease. It has a little too much paint. Okay. Okay. I'm liking it so far. I'm really happy with where we're getting on that. We're gonna put some of like more detailed pieces on him here pretty soon, and start wrapping him up. I do want to go ahead and take a break real quick. And something that if you have painted a lot, you'll probably know this, but if you haven't painted a lot, give yourself breaks. You might have to like set a timer or something for yourself, but it's super important for you to like get up, stand up, stretch a little bit, you know, so that you're not just like crammed over your miniature the entire time. So let's go ahead and take just like a 5-minute break, and then we'll come right back. That'll also give our dragon time to dry for us, okay? Thank you so much. Yeah, what was I saw a couple of things in the chat, and then yeah, and then you had mentioned having to pause for a second. I was like, oh no. Oh. Right, I'm gonna run to the restroom real fast and then get a drink, and then I'll be good. Okay. Right. I can go back and forth. Actually, I was hoping. I think I readjusted my camera on accident at one point. Dang it, the zoom on it. Oh, actually. Well, I can see my video on Discord, and so I think I just adjust. I think that, yeah, okay, actually, that was, yeah. Okay, perfect. It was looking blurry when I was holding it to try and show them something, and I was like, oh, I can't hardly see anything. But no, okay, I think I got it though, so I think we're good. Thank you. Okay. A little bowl. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks so much again for joining us. We're working on our gold dragon here. He should be pretty dry by now, so we should be absolutely fine to go ahead and continue on it. Okay, so if you haven't already, just check over your dragon. Make sure that there's not, excuse me, any spots that you felt like you missed, or maybe something that you accidentally covered that you didn't mean to cover. So one thing is on the inside of his wing here, I accidentally put some yellow. So I'm just going to touch that up with a bit of this orange. Let's go back over that. There we go. That's perfectly fine. Okay. And then I also noticed earlier that the inside of our dragon's mouth here, I had missed a spot when I was coating in red. And I would like the inside of his mouth to be red. So I am going to go back to my red over here on my palette. Pick some of that paint up and just go right back into there. And I am using my smaller brush because we've done so much on the outside of our dragon. Oh, I say that and then boom, right there on the outside of his face. So I was using my smaller brush in hopes that I wouldn't get anything on the outside, but it happens. So that's okay. We will go back over it. All right. Okay, well, at least I got the inside of his mouth now. That's going to be like the hardest thing. Thank goodness he wasn't completely finished and then we had that happen. That would have really stunk. All right. Okay, I'm going to apply orange back to the spot that I just hit with that red, just to kind of make it not quite so obvious that it's just like a bright red spot around his mouth. All right, there we go. Suppose if you really wanted to, maybe he was just chewing on a little critter and ate him. I don't know. Okay. All right, there we go. So, next thing we're going to do, we've got our main yellow on there. If you wanted to do just kind of something that would just be an easy point at this, or an easy thing at this point, is that some people will just take their gold color and coat their dragon in the gold. Some people do that from the beginning. I like my dragons to have a little more detail in them, so that's why we did all this other stuff. So if you wanted to do that at this point, you absolutely can. However, I am not going to, because I want to layer a few more things before I'm going to put some flakes of gold and not actually coat my dragon with the gold. So I'm going to move to my yellow highlight, so my brightest yellow. You might be using a lemon yellow or just some other type of yellow that's lighter. It's like a pale kind of yellow. Some some drips on there. I am going to water it down just a little bit, but again, just ever so much, just ever so slightly, because I don't want this one to be too terribly thin. Yeah, I'm going to use my medium brush, I think, to do this one. I'll mix that water into my yellow. There we go. All right, feeling pretty good about that. Let's feel this out. Yep, that looks good. All right, so this color, I am going to be very specific about where I apply this color. I want to apply this on those, like, the outsides of those muscly areas and those top pieces of him. And I'm really trying to not put this into any of the creases. So I am really trying to just hit those top areas and not fill the creases on my dragon here. And I'm going to be honest, I think I added too much water to this. So I am going to add some more paint. There we go. Mix that in, because I, although I do want this to flow nicely over my miniature, I do not want it to fill those creases, because I want that dark color to still stick out for me. So as you're applying this, it is probably gonna look weird to you, because it just looks like these like blotches, these spots of super light yellow, or maybe even like a white almost. So it's probably gonna look weird. But don't worry, this is not the final product that we're looking for. This is to hit those highlighted areas that we want to stand out compared to the rest of the miniature. So it's not going to stay like this. Okay. Just adding some of this where I want it to maybe be a little lighter. So you can kind of see, I'm going to see if turning my light off helps with this. Not really. I'm trying to make it so you guys can kind of see it, but you can kind of, there, that's a little better actually. Just moving it closer. You can kind of see where the different muscle areas just look like they just have white kind of spots on them. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm just like applying some very light colors to those areas, so that they will stand out for me. So if anybody was on the video yesterday with the owl bear, I actually did something similar to this, not in the same way. This is a different way to do it, but I did something similar to this with the owl bear, where I wanted something to look a lot lighter when I applied the color that I wanted it to be. So I applied white to the area that I wanted to look lighter. And then when I went back over that area with the color that I actually wanted it to be, the places where I had applied that white really popped out in comparison to everything else. And so that's what I'm really doing with this highlighted yellow color, is I'm really just trying to get those places that I want to be lighter than the rest of the miniature. And this is kind of a quick way to do your blending, I want to say. So instead of actually like blending them on the palette and trying to find the right color and things like that, I'm just adding the light color onto the miniature first, and then I'm going to go back over it, layering it with the darker color. So we're going to go back to that yellow color after this is done. Okay. On his tail here, I really just kind of did like a line of that highlighted yellow instead of doing the entire piece of the tail there. I just did kind of like a line at the top because I want the top of that piece to be lighter, not necessarily the entire thing. So I'll do that on this tip here, and then a little bit down his tail here, but maybe not down the entire part of the tail, because some of it is in the crease and will probably be a little darker anyway. So just gonna put a little at the top and then down his back. And you can put it wherever you'd like, but I think I'm gonna put it just kind of down the center of his back. There we go. You don't have to be super like strict with yourself about making sure it's a clean line or anything like that. Make sure you don't get it on anything that you want to stay dark, but you don't have to be so careful that you have to make sure it's a clean straight line, because when we go to apply the middle color, the middle yellow back onto it, that will kind of blend those two areas. So you don't have to worry about it being a specifically straight line necessarily. I'm going to put a few places on his face that I kind of would like to be lighter as well. Like his eyebrows, I kind of like those to be a little lighter. He's got some like scaly cheekbones that I would kind of like to be a little bit lighter. So I'm going to apply that on there. I'd like his nose to be a little bit lighter, so I'm going to put some there. Just kind of think about the places on your mini that you would like to look a little bit lighter than the yellow that's on it right now. I'd like the top of his head to also be lighter. I'm going to do that. Just kind of brush it over, because I actually would kind of like the whole top of his head. I mean, not the creases, but the most part, the top of his head. So what I kind of did there was I flattened my brush tip out. So like this side is kind of flatter, or this is still kind of a point. And then I rubbed the flat side over the top of his head so that it would kind of grab those areas on top of his head that stick out more than the other pieces. So it's basically dry brushing, just in a different use for it. Okay, so I've got that side, I've got his head, his neck, most of his tail and his back. So I really just have this other side here that I need to start thinking about, like what muscles I want to show and things like that. So I've got one more side, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay. Getting some of those muscles on there. Some of the areas that just kind of stick out more. Maybe front side of his legs. I didn't really touch those. You know, when we originally did the yellow, we were worried about, we got to make sure we get underneath to those back legs. Well, this time I'm not going to worry about that, because those legs, they're underneath, so they're not going to be as light. The light doesn't hit them, the sun doesn't hit them as much, so they don't, they're probably not as faded, like the scales there are not going to be as faded. And then there's also probably more light hitting this dragon from above than below. So those are going to be in shadow anyway. So I'm not really worried about getting these highlights on there. I am gonna add some more water, just a little bit with my smaller or my medium-sized brush here. I'm putting some clean water on my medium-sized brush and blending that back into my paint because it felt like it was getting thin again and not flowing as well. All right, there we go. That's much better. All right. There we go. Okay, there we are. Let's get his front side here. Okay, there we go. And do his neck. Oh, man. I got some on his scales on his belly. That's okay. We're gonna work on those in a little bit anyway. Just put some of this on him, on his neck. That looks pretty good. Be sure you check the inside of his neck as well, and where you want that on the inside of his neck, or if you even do, because that'll make a difference when you reapply the other yellow color, the darker yellow color. Okay, I think I just have just a couple of more spots that I want to try and hit with this. And then I think we'll be able to move on to the next piece. I hit just a little bit of that tail in the back. Go on that side of the tail. Okay, all right. So your dragon probably looks kind of splotchy right now, and that's okay. We're gonna clean our brush off. Okay. All right, and then I am gonna go back. So if you applied the pale or the pale or the lemon yellow on light enough, it should probably be dry wherever you started at. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my medium yellow color, a darker yellow, pull a little bit more back onto my palette. There we go. Add a tad of clean water to it. Clean that brush off. Add just like, I think I'm just gonna do like a drop. There we go. And then mix that. Okay. There we go. All right, that looks good, I think. So I don't want this to go on too thick because I want to be able to see those lighter areas. So I'm going to go back to the flat part, or the flat brush that I was talking about, where I make my side of my brush flat. So one side is pointed, the other side is flat, and I'm going to take the flat side and run it over my dragon. Okay, I'm going to get a little more paint in there. There we go. So now this one, as you're putting this coat on, it is okay that it gets into your creases. You don't want it to be too runny because you don't want it to sit in your creases, but it's okay if it gets into those creases because this is the darker color that we are wanting to really shine through anyway. So, okay, that's looking good. All right, actually, I'm really, really happy with this. The way that's turning out. This is looking good. Hopefully yours is too. This is absolutely just like one type of technique. This is in no way like the only way you can do this. There's lots of different ways that you can paint this type of a miniature. And like I said before, some people prefer to just straight use the metallic, and there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you like, that's awesome. And you can absolutely do that. I like to try and give a little more depth and things like that. And my plan with this dragon is that we could paint it to the point that we don't need to use any metallic. We can be happy with it without having actually applied any metallic to it at all, even though it's a gold dragon. Or we can apply the metallic to a couple of places and just kind of give it like a little sheen, as if it's, you know, those particular spots are hitting the light just right. And so that can kind of look neat. And then you could, after we're done completely, still apply a thin layer of gold if you wanted to make the entire thing shine. You know, there's so many different options that you could really do with this. If you find any spots that you feel like are too dark still, go ahead and use this time that we're painting over our light areas to paint those parts as well. So I just found a spot on his back leg there that I felt like was it's too much orange and not enough yellowy color for my gold dragon. So I just went back over it to really kind of help shine through that gold or the yellowish gold aspect. Okay, I'm gonna go down his center here again, and I got quite a bit on his frills, but that's okay. We're not done with those frills anyway. So there's a couple of times, if this is your first time tuning into one of my workshops, I'm going to definitely go ahead and repeat this, but if you've watched my other ones, you've already heard me say this, but I do try most of the time to work on my miniatures from the inside out. So you work on the most hidden areas first, so that way you get them to the point that you're happy with them, and then you work on things that are outside of them. So that way you're not trying to do something on the inside of an area like this back compared to these wings. If I had my wings completely done to exactly how I wanted them, and then I tried to paint his back, and then I got some paint on the sides up here, it would mess up the wings that I completely finished, and it would be such a pain to have to go back and try and finish something that I already felt like was perfect. So if you work from the inside, perfect what you like on the inside first, then work your way out, you're less likely, not impossible, but you're less likely to mess something up on the inside than you are to mess something up on the outside. Hopefully that made sense. Alright, just going up those sides there. His wings where his muscles are kind of showing. Sometimes it still surprises me what you can do with paint. So as I'm painting this, I'm actually very happy with how it's turning out. So you can kind of, I don't know how well you can see this through the camera, but for me, I can really see those different ridges in his muscles and things like that. And so, and that's because of the highlight that I put on first, and then this coat going over top of it. It can really make those kinds of things like pop without having to do too much blending. Now this is definitely not a technique that I would want to use if I was trying to paint for a competition, but it absolutely works great and is pretty quick for a tabletop miniature, and getting something to put on the table that looks good and is fun. Hopefully you can get some compliments on it. Alright, I'm going to do the back of his neck here. Again, I want to make sure that I thoroughly get that back of that neck covered. It is a commonly missed area because it's kind of hidden by those wings. You almost don't think about it until you look at the inside of the wings. So I just want to make sure that I get that covered. Alright, paint over his head here. There we go. Paint over his cheeks. Top of his head. His nose. See the nose there. There we go. Alright, that's looking good. I got the other side of his neck to do here. I did not put any of that really light yellow on the bottom of his chin. Because it's kind of a dark area, right? We don't really think about light hitting us from underneath. If you are painting for competition, you probably would take that into consideration, and if there is a light source coming from underneath. But for our purposes, you know, we're not really planning on there being any light source coming from underneath, so I'm not really worried about putting the light color under there. But I do still want it to be a really pretty yellow color to show that this is a gold dragon through and through. So I went ahead and put reapplied some yellow back on there, but not in a way that would really brighten it up too much. I'm gonna add a little bit more water again, but just to my brush. I'm not adding a bunch to the mix of paint here. I just want enough to make it kind of flow a little nicer again, just because the air's drying it out. And I think I only have this one side left to go back over. I'm just gonna go lightly over top of that, cover up my pale white colors. Gosh, I just really like how that works together. It makes me really happy to see that yellow shine through, make him look like an actual goldish yellow. Okay. Alright, I think that should wrap me up fairly well. I'm gonna touch up this inside of his tail with some yellow again, because I feel like I didn't do a very good job of that last time. So I'm just gonna hit the inside just real quick. There we go. Okay, so I'm actually pretty happy with the way he looks there. I'm not done layering, but I think I am done with this particular layer. If you felt like you maybe applied too much yellow, or maybe you didn't hit enough highlights, or maybe you hit too many highlights and you don't like where that's at, you can always go back. If you need more highlights, just put more of the pale yellow on and then reapply the middle yellow. If you felt like you hit too many places with the highlights and you need some of your shadow back, then what I would recommend is watering down your orangish color, so your darker color here, or not the very darkest, but the second to darkest. Water that down, make it so that it's kind of more of an inky kind of color, or not kind of color, I'm sorry, an inky kind of consistency. Actually, I might go ahead and just show you that real quick, just so that you kind of can see that. And I think I might... Actually, you know what? I'm going to try that technique on his wings. So I think for his bottom wings versus his top wings, I think I want this top wings to be a little lighter than the bottom parts of his wings. Mostly because when you see a dragon, that's well, other painted miniatures of a dragon, not a real dragon, obviously. But if you think about maybe like a bird or something like that, the top parts of their wings are usually kind of a different color than their underside of their wings. And depending on what type of bird or what type of dragon that has been painted or something like that, the top might be darker or sometimes the bottom might be darker. So I think for this gold dragon, I'm going to use the bottom wings as a darker color and the top of the wings as a lighter color. So because I'm going to do that, I am going to take, you can use your medium brush or a slightly bigger brush. Again, this comes back to what are you comfortable with using. I'm going to go ahead and use my bigger one. I'm just going to kind of get it wet here. And I'm going to put a thin-ish layer of my yellow. I don't want to make it too thin, but I'm going to put, but thinner than I did on the outside here. I'm going to put this on the inside of my wings. So just real quick. And I'm getting some bubbles because I kind of am doing this a little fast. That's okay. I can come back and fix those. All right. Okay. Alright, I'm going to grab a little bit more paint. I think I added maybe a little too much water, so I'm just going to grab some more paint and less water. Kind of go back over that again. And it's still wet, but that's okay. We're using the same color, so it's not really a big deal. Okay, there we go. That looks nicer. Go back down through this little part again. There we go. Back up through this side. Some more paint on that side. If you see the paint starting to pool up a little bit, it just like mine is, you might have too much water, so you might try and get a little bit more paint in your mixture than water. But you can also take your brush and like pull out some of that paint where it's pooling up. So if I clean my brush off, dry it off a little bit, and kind of pull some of those areas back out where maybe there's a little too much. Okay, now before I can do the technique that I was talking about earlier, where I'm gonna go back in and put some of that dark shadow back in with my orange to kind of make it look a little inky and put that back in, I have to wait for this to dry. So I am going to go ahead and let that dry. And while that dries, I'm actually going to work on his underbelly here. Okay. So I'm going to clean my big brush and I am going to move to my smallest brush because I really want to be pretty detailed with this underbelly here. Okay. So to do that, I'm going to find a new spot on my palette, okay, and I am going to use my white. Again, mine is kind of a slightly off-white. You can absolutely use just like a regular white. What I kind of actually wish I had right now is like a darker cream color of white. I kind of wish my white was a little more cream colored, but that's okay. We'll make do with what we've got. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be very careful about where I apply this white, and I'm gonna actually apply it to the best of my ability, at least. I'm gonna apply it so that it covers each of these scales, but I'm gonna try to leave a space in between the scales. so that there's like a dark slit there still. If you mess up and you get them too close, that's absolutely okay. We're gonna come back and touch these up again. But that's gonna be my initial go-to on this, what I'm doing right now. All right, so I'm just going through, and I am doing one side at a time. So if you feel more comfortable doing both sides at a time, that's absolutely okay. Oh, and something I didn't mention, but hopefully you kind of noticed, was that I didn't actually end up adding water to this. I don't want this to be thin, so that I can control it a little better. So it is going to maybe feel a little globby compared to what we have been doing. You just have to be very careful that you don't have too much paint on your brush while you're doing this. So just be sure that you don't have like a glob of paint on your brush. You just kind of, you put a little bit on the brush, and I am only using basically the tip of my brush. I'm not coating my entire brush. I'm just putting my tip inside of my paint and just ever so lightly drawing it across the surface of where I'm trying to paint. And so, kind of like I mentioned before, I'm moving my miniature rather than moving my hand, because I want the miniature to do the work for me. I want my hand to be comfortable and sturdy. And another way that I tend to help sturdy myself is like I cup my hands. And so I have my miniature inside my hand, and then my brush, however it's comfortable. And I'll get my hands very close together and almost form kind of like a tripod for myself. And my arms, my forearms here, are resting on the table to sturdy myself as well. So I'm kind of doing that. And then when I'm actually touching the miniature, so I'm actually applying the paint, I set the paintbrush on the innermost surface of where I'm trying to paint, and then I just pull my brush across it. Pull my brush across it. So I try and line up whatever it is I'm painting with the direction that I pull my brush. So again, my miniature is doing the work for me instead of me having to try and maneuver my hand around to what will actually work to paint the miniature, but instead I'm moving the miniature around to how I can paint it while my hand is still comfortable. So I know that the bottom of the base that I'm using to hold this miniature is kind of in the way right now, so I do apologize for that. I am trying to get the belly of the dragon right now, and so that can kind of be pretty challenging to get to. So I have to move my miniature so that I can kind of see more of those surfaces in there. And so I'm not going to be too picky about his direct underbelly and where I am applying this. I'm going to try and make some general guesses of where the texture of the belly is, but you're not really going to have a whole lot of people that are really getting a magnifying glass and really checking out the belly of your dragon. So as long as you kind of get a general pattern underneath of your dragon, that's really kind of the most important part, because no one's going to look at the super detailed pieces of it. They're just going to kind of see that, oh yeah, that does kind of match the rest of the dragon. That makes sense. And then they're going to move on. They're not going to dwell on it, most likely. Okay, gotta figure out what my best pattern for doing this tail piece underneath is going to be. And again, keep in mind, I've only done one side of this underbelly piece so far with these little lines. And once you get so far on his tail, you kind of lose the detail in where those lines are. And so I'm just kind of making them up, to be honest. Again, it kind of goes back to, it's really more about the pattern that you're using and the actual detail itself of where those lines are. So as long as it kind of makes sense to your brain about where those scales lie, not having the detail of where they actually are is really not that big a deal. So you can kind of see, I just kind of made some little dash marks along that side there. Okay, so now, let's see, I do have a few under his chin that I need to go back and do on the same side, so I'm going to do that real quick before I move to the other side. Oh man. Alright, so the problem I'm hitting right now is that my paint has been sitting out and drying up, and it's drying faster even because I haven't added any water to it at all. So I'm going to take just barely any water in my tiny brush here and kind of mix that into a small bit of my white color here. That should help me flow a little bit better, but I'm really going to be very careful that it's not too thin. So I'm testing it out on my hand. You can test it out on your paper towel if you have one, or a newspaper, or on your palette, whatever you've got accessible, to make sure that there's just not too much water, because you do not want this white to fill into your creases of where you're painting for this particular piece. Okay. A little more paint there. Alright, it's a little better. Alright, I am going to have to shift my miniature so that I can kind of reach a little more underneath his chin. This paint is just drying too fast on me. Try and fix in just a little more water. You may not be having this problem. I know with in my house right now with the heater running, it's just drying out everything a little bit more, you know. So you might have the same issue, or maybe you don't have your heat on yet, or whatever the case may be. So if you're not adding as much water as I keep having to add to my miniatures, that's okay. Or I guess adding to my paints, not my miniatures. Alright, so he's kind of got just like almost just a line underneath of his chin rather than like some actual scales. Okay. Alright, I'm feeling good about that side. So I'm going to switch over to the other side. I'm just going to turn him around. And do that side of his under chin. Okay. Then I'm going to turn him this way. Let's see, maybe... Yeah, that'll work. Okay. There we go. I know this can be tedious work, but hopefully it'll pay off for you. Alright, just filling in those scales, trying to leave the gap. There we go. Alright, I'm back to his belly again. So, again, this can kind of be a challenging part. So just move your mini around until you kind of find an angle that you feel like will work well for you. So, again, I'm going to show you the bottom of my cap here because that is just the angle that just seems to work well for that particular part. And then I'm going to do just this generic part of his belly. Again, I'm just kind of, I'm doing a little bit of detail, but not being more vague, again, on his underbelly there. Okay, this part is going to be super hard. We're trying to get inside of his tail, but underneath. So I need to really try and find a good angle for that. Maybe like this would be good. So the part that makes me nervous on this is that I'm not getting to hold it tight like I really like to do. So I still have to find a place to sturdy myself. So I kind of have my two fingers on each hand right here kind of pressed against each other. And that, for me, kind of helps sturdy my hands a little bit so that I don't shake as much as I go in and do those fine little tiny dots on his tail there. Okay. Kind of my ones on his tail are not necessarily meeting up in the middle that well. So I'm just kind of brushing over the top to kind of help them meet each other just a little bit more. There we go. I'm not worried about that on his chest too much. They actually meet pretty well on his chest, so I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so there is the white on a dragon's chest. If you used like a nice tan color, you might be happy with it and you might be done with it, and that's absolutely okay. I do not like the pure white of it. Maybe you do, and that's awesome. That's just not my style. So now that we've got that on there, I am actually going to go back over it with our orange color, and kind of give it a little brighter orange than like on our wings and stuff like that. So it'll still stand out differently, but it'll be lighter, so it'll still be different and be obvious that it's kind of a different piece to the dragon. So add some more of my orange. And actually, now that I think about it, I almost want it to be a little darker than this orange. So what I might actually do, so I talked about this earlier, but I might put a couple of drops of orange on here, maybe one more, and put like a drop of red on here. There we go. All right. And I think I'm going to mix those two. I think I'm going to mix those and then put that on top of my white. And we'll see how it goes. I am going to go back to my medium-sized brush. And I'm going to mix those two. But before I do that, I'm going to also add some water to that pile, because I do want a little bit of water in there. There we go. All right. All right, so let's mix those two. I can't remember if I said this out loud, but I went back to my medium-sized brush. This is an FYI. Okay, I'm liking that a little. Yeah, I'm liking that pretty well. Okay, that's a pretty color for me. I like that a lot. So we've got that on there. And now, because this is our darker color, I am not afraid to go in those creases now, because I wanted those creases to be darker anyway. So when I use this color, I'm going to go back over everything, and I'm not really afraid to hit just everything on the underside of his neck. I am going to be careful to not get too into my yellow that I've already kind of finished. We can always go back, because these are the same colors that we used on that part of our dragon, just in a different way. So we can absolutely always go back and fix any mistakes that we have done pretty easily. But if we don't have to, that's kind of nice. Okay, so I'm doing that. I'm making sure that I'm getting the outside next to that ridges there, so that it really shows that shadow. As you get closer to the top part up here to his neck, one of two things that you could do. You could flatten out your brush like we did when we were dry brushing, and then use the thin side. Instead of using the flat side, you use the thin side to go along that. The easier thing might be to switch to your tiny brush if you've got one. Might be a little easier to do. Again, back to your comfort with the brush. How do you feel it works best for you, and which brush do you feel like works best for you? So, whatever you want to do there. Okay. Alright. Getting the other side here. So this time, I am not going fully down one side and then doing the other side. I'm trying to do them at the same time. I really want each side to be pretty similar to the other side. So I want to be able to compare the two as I go, rather than just kind of being loosey-goosey with it. So I'm kind of jumping back and forth here to each side as I work. Alright, there we go. Alright, and then to his belly. I'm going to turn him a little bit here. Okay, I am trying to be careful on his stomach because I don't really want this dark color to get onto his legs if I can help it. Because I really don't want to have to go back and do them again if I don't have to. Legs can be pretty challenging in general, let alone if you start putting colors that aren't supposed to be there on there. So, alright, now I'm out to his tail. Feel okay with underneath of him. His tail, I'm just going back over those spots that we did before. I'm gonna look on the inside here, make sure I got everything. Alright, we're looking good there. Feeling okay. Alright. Okay. So now he's kind of got this darker underbelly here. Again, another place that you could totally stop if you wanted to. It does have a little bit of depth to it, but not quite as much depth as I would personally like it to have. So I am going to go ahead and go back in and add some texture onto those different detailed areas so that they stand out just a little bit more. Okay, this is going to come back to dry brushing again. Because dry brushing is such a great way to give things this kind of texture, especially when they have all this detail in them. It's a great way to add some texture. So it's going to be a mixture of detail work as well as dry brushing. So what I'm going to do, I do think I'm going to keep using my medium brush, but if you feel more comfortable moving to your small brush, you can. But what we're really going to be doing is using the side of our brush rather than like the tip. So instead of coming straight at it, we're going to use the side of our brush. Okay, I'm going to go back to that white color or something else that might also be kind of pretty. I'm trying to decide if I want to do it or not. I don't know. I think I might just do the white just to be on the safe side. If you're feeling ambitious and you want to give it a shot, you could also use that light yellow color. That would probably also look very nice on here for what we're getting ready to do. So it's up to you, whatever you want to do there. So when we dry brush, we want to make sure that there's not too much paint on the paintbrush. We want to be pretty lenient on how many or how much paint is on there. So then we're going to go opposite of the grain of the of what we're trying to add paint to. So these scales are all pointed down. So I'm going to pull my brush up across them so that the paint will ideally attach to just the outsides of that surface and not cover the entire area. My paint dried on my paintbrush as I was talking, so I'm gonna refill that. All right. Okay. So sure there's not too much paint on there. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good about that. All right, I'm gonna get back to my comfortable place and then drag the paintbrush across that area. Okay, and hopefully if you haven't added too much paint to your paintbrush, it really should just be holding on just the edges of those scales. And that is what we are looking for. Oh, I had a little too much on that one. I have to get some. And it really can be trial and error. So, you know, a mistake is not a big deal. You can absolutely get it fixed. Yeah, some of these scales I'm getting too much paint on. That's totally my fault there. I'm going to do a little bit of back and forth. So I'm going to go up some and then down a little bit for these sides of these. So I'm going to do a little bit of back and forth, but I'm still trying to be very cautious that I'm really only hitting just the surface, barely the surface of those areas instead of the entire scale. These top ones up here underneath of his chin are going to be the more challenging ones. So be careful when you're up there, or maybe you just kind of want to just dab those on instead of actually doing the dry brush technique. The dry brush is typically a lot easier on like a large surface or a large area that has a lot of texture, rather than like something small and detailed like this. So so if you're having a hard time with it, that is okay, and it's absolutely understandable. It is definitely a challenge to do dry brushing on such a small area or such a small piece of a miniature. Okay, so belly. So I feel good, pretty good about his mid area there. I did have a little flub up. Actually, I'm gonna use this in. I did have a little flub up down here where I have too much white, and I don't like that. So I'm going to go back over it, but I'm going to finish up with my dry brushing before I do that. So, okay. So his belly, just like before, like we talked about before, I'm going to just like do super, super generic strokes on his belly and just try and catch any little ridges. But I really don't want to do too much on his belly because, again, he's not really going to have too much showing down there. And the belly of this particular dragon doesn't really look like it has a whole lot of texture, so it's going to be a challenge anyway. So I've gotten a little bit down there, and I think if somebody was just looking at this miniature and just checking out things, they would see down there that, oh yeah, that color pattern matches the colors that were used on the stomach. And I don't think that they're going to look that closely to see that it's not exactly the same. I think it's going to be enough that people will look at it and go, oh, yep, that makes sense. And then they'll move on to another piece of the dragon. Especially if we make the rest of the dragon look super cool, I don't think anybody will care. So that's my take on it. You can do whatever you want. All right, onto his tail. Again, I need to make sure I don't have too much paint because I feel like I did there for a second. So some of his tail does have some texture or some detail right here at the front side of it. Ugh, my paint keeps drying out on me, so it's kind of hard to do. I really don't like to use water in the paint that I'm dry brushing with, because it really should be a thicker paint that you're kind of doing dry brushing with. It works out better that way, but sometimes you can't help it just because it's so dry. So, and it dries too fast on your paintbrush. Okay, so there's a little texture there, so I'm going to kind of add some of that. But then after that point, there's not really a whole lot of texture. So I think I'm just going to kind of dab some spots. Just tap them. Just let some of my paint come off on that area until I kind of feel like the pattern matches fairly well. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to do this inside here. It's going to be challenging to reach. Just like there. And there. Yeah, man, that's really hard to see under there. But I think you're going to have that trouble no matter what, really. That happens. Yeah, it can really end up being a challenge on miniatures that have like shields or cloaks, things like that. They're super fun to paint, and I love painting that kind of stuff, but it really can be a challenge to paint the underside of those type of things. Same thing, you know, with your creatures. If they have a long tail that kind of wraps around, it can be hard to get to, even though it looks really cool. Okay, pretty happy with where I applied my white on there and how that's kind of looking a little more textured for us. I think that's looking much better. I'm liking that a lot. I'm just going to go back over that one little area where I felt like I kind of had messed up on it. I'm going to be super duper careful. I'm going to try to be super duper careful and just barely add in some of this orangish red color that I mixed on my palette that we originally used in this area. Just going to go back in, and any places that I kind of felt like maybe I added a little too much white, just going to go back in and touch those up. Alright, that looks good. That looks good. This side, I kind of did that too, right there. Right there. Okay. It's still going to look a little bit lighter, but I think that's okay. Still think it looks really good. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm super happy with that. Hopefully you can kind of see that pattern on his chest, and that and then you like how yours turned out too. Okay. So now that we've finished that up, his wings should be totally dry, and we can go back in and do that inking that I was talking about earlier. And we actually have this medium dark color of orange now, and I kind of like that one. So since we're done with his underbelly, I think I might put some more water in that really dark color, the mixture between the red and the orange that we had kind of made. I'm going to add some more water to that, make it thin. So hopefully it'll fill in those creases for us. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Alright. And I think that's what I'm going to use inside his wings. So anywhere on the dragon that you feel like has lost its shadow, or you want to have a deeper shadow, you can use maybe the orange straight from the bottle, or you can do a mixture of the red and orange if you want a really dark shadow, whatever you kind of want to do there, and just thin it down to kind of a consistency of ink. And so once it's kind of that thin, you can just go back in. Oh, mine is not thin enough. That looks like regular paint. So, yeah, there we go. So I'm going to add more water. There we go. So it really needs to be pretty thin, like ink. And it's literally called inking. So it's another quick way to give your character shadows in their different areas without having to do too much blending. Again, I want to just kind of repeat that this is definitely a technique that is great for tabletop painting. Not so much for competition painting. Most of the time when people do that kind of stuff in competition painting, it's kind of not looked at in very good light necessarily, because the blending is not as smooth as if you like mixed everything on here and went from a darker color to a lighter color and things like that. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with this technique when you just want a good looking miniature, you know, and you just want to kind of be able to do it fast. Competition miniatures can really just take hours and hours, days of time from you. And so obviously we don't have that kind of time for this workshop, let alone sometimes in our daily lives. So there we go. I'm liking that pretty well. And with this darker kind of color, especially if I mix in just a little bit more red with it, I could even go back and do these outside wings. Oh, that is not have enough water in it. If you get like, so you notice I just globbed some paint right there, and then I noticed it was not thin enough. So I'm just gonna, I cleaned my brush out. I'm gonna take some water in my brush and then just run it back over that area. And it just thins it right out for me. So instead of having to try and find a paper towel real quick and get it wiped off and all that other stuff, since I really kind of wanted that color there anyway, I was able to just grab some water and then move it around and thin it out. Okay, got a little bit more. Do the other side. Be sure you're getting pieces of his tail while you're doing this. The little ridges that follow his tail for his wings. There we go. Okay. Now as that dries, that should show us a little bit more depth in his wings. But if it's not showing you enough depth that you really like it to show, then you can go back and you'll notice that there are bumps in here. They're not as deep as our chest scales, but there are those ridges there. So when this dries, if we would like, we can go back in and put some of these lighter colors back over those ridges again and pop them back out again. Okay? We can go back and forth and layer those kind of as many times as we want, really. So as long as you're keeping your paint thin enough, then you can keep doing that. Okay, I am probably for our session, I'm gonna go ahead and leave him. If I was going to keep him for whatever, or keep working on him, I might go back and do some of those ridges that I was talking about, which is kind of what I did for my tester one. But I'll leave that for you to decide if you want to do that or not. We've already learned the technique for his chest here. You just have to reapply that technique for his wings. I just noticed that some of the inky kind of stuff that I was using on his wings is seeping down into his back. And so I'm just absorbing that with a clean brush. So be sure you clean your brush, if that happens to you too. Clean your brush, run your brush along the ridge of that bottom part there until you feel like it's cleaned up. And then dry your brush and clean and dry your brush out again. Okay, Let's start thinking about some details here. Let's think about his face and some of these like bones, these horns that are sticking out on him in different locations. He's got, I'll use my paintbrush here. He's got, you know, kind of a shoulder claw or bone sticking out of his elbow there. He's got these little tiny horns on the back of his head. He's got some under his chin and on his jaw here, different things like that. So we want to touch up those places and kind of help them stand out a little bit. Or I do. You may not, and that's okay. But I like to touch those up and make them kind of look like horns a little bit. This is another situation where I probably would have preferred to use maybe a bone white kind of color, so just something that's kind of more cream colored. But again, we are going to make do with what we've got, because you just never know if you're going to have that type of a color or not. If you have a brown color, like maybe one of the browns, if you have the owl bear colors, or you just have your own palette at home of colors, you could use your white mixed with just like a super light tan color. Like the oily leather that we used from yesterday or something like that. And you can mix it with your white or your off-white to make a very nice color that really can go well with different bones and horns on creatures. So something to think about. But for me, I'm going to act as if I only have this white option and I don't have anything else. So I'm just going to go ahead and use that particular color. I have, I've put it on my palette. I think I'm going to be okay to just go ahead and straight use it and not add water to it for these horns. So I'm going to try that out first, see how I feel. And then if I feel like I need to add some water, I can. I'm going to start with these little hooks on his elbows. And I'm just going to kind of touch them up. I'm already wrong. I can already tell I need water. House is just too darn dry. All right, there we go. I am using my medium brush again on this, just as an FYI, but you absolutely can use your small brush if that makes you feel more comfortable. It's all about that brush control. All right, so I'm putting that on. I'm just barely touching on that area just to make sure that some paint applies to it. I'm going to turn him over and do his other side as well. There we go. Feeling pretty good about that. Again, just barely touched on it to add some paint to it. I'm going to do his nails. So his claws, sorry. Right now it looks like he has red toenail polish on. Maybe you want yours to have red toenail polish on, and that is okay. But I want them to be a whitish color. Alright, so I'm just kind of touching on those as well. This I might try and... make sure that the red is fully covered rather than just kind of touching on those nails. Because we're going from red to white, it can be a challenge to kind of cover that up. So I'm gonna try and be pretty thorough with my white. Keep in mind that you may end up needing to go back over some places like his toenails, because of that stark difference between the two colors. Kind of like we talked about before, white and yellow are both colors that are challenging to cover up other areas with darker colors because of their more translucent and light colors, or the lighter color of them. Okay. Alright, I'm almost done with this front ones. Just trying to touch those up. You'll want to be careful that you don't Don't let it get too globby, too thick on there. And just always know that, you know, you can always come back to it and redo it if you need to. So if your first layer is you can still see the red through it and you just don't like it, don't just keep piling on the wet paint. Wait until it dries and then come back and touch it up again. That's going to look much better than just thickening up the paint and kind of making it look like their toenails are way thicker than they really should be. For this back, for this back leg back here, it was hard to reach from this angle, so I went in through his belly. And again, this is where I wanted to be very careful about how I came down in there, because I don't mind if I touch the base, but I do mind if I touch his belly, because we've already worked on that belly quite a bit, right? So just be cautious when you're doing that. And again, make sure that you are making your miniature work for you instead of you having to work to get your miniature covered. Alright, we've got one more toenail here. And again, I think I'm going to have to go in through the middle part like I did before. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. I know it can be hard, but try not to be too much of a perfectionist when it comes to those toenails, especially in the back part, because it's going to be so hard to get it thoroughly covered in every single angle. Sorry. I'm going to grab a drink here real quick. Oh, that's much better. Okay. So yeah, so those back inside ones, it can really be a challenge to get them, and that's okay. Don't feel like you have to be perfect with it. Your players or you, if you're going to be playing with it, it's gonna be awesome, and everybody's gonna love it anyway, because you're gonna have so much cool other details to it and stuff. So while I was painting those toenails, I noticed on the back side of his leg here that I had gotten some red paint on there. So I need to cover that back up. So I'm going to pull this yellow color back out. I'm going to take just a dab of it, put it on my tray here, get some clean water, and I'm just going to fill my brush with the clean water and then mix that together, because I don't want this to be too thick, which actually I might have thinned it down, or I don't want it to be too thin is what I meant, sorry. I might have thinned it down too much, so I'm going to add just a little bit more paint. So even though I don't want it to be super thick, because I want it to flow well, I also don't want it to be too thin, because I need to cover that red, and that's going to be a stark difference again. It was a pretty thin spot of red, so I'm not super concerned. Oh, there. Okay, yeah, actually just one coat covered it right up. That's perfect. Awesome. Wonder if I did that anywhere else. Oh, yep, I found one more spot where I did that. So inside of his leg, I don't know if you can see it, but inside of his leg right in here, I did the same thing. So I'm just going to run this same color right over it, and boom. Again, I don't know if you could see it before, but that covered it right up. Perfect. Okay. Layering is fantastic. Okay, back to our white. We've got the nails done. We've got his elbows done. I'm going to do the white marks on his face. I'm going to get just a little bit of water into my brush for this white so that it flows well. Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm going to do these horns on his head. Make sure you get both sides of them. Sometimes you have to get 3 angles to make sure that you've gotten everything, so just be sure you move them around. and check out all different sides. I just realized I didn't put my lid back on my paint. Ugh, don't forget to do that because you don't want it to dry out. Okay, there we go. Alright, those two look good. I'm happy with those. I'm gonna do these little ones on his chin, just like I did his elbows. I'm just kind of dabbing the paint on just a little bit there. Okay, pretty happy with that. I am gonna get the underside of these because they are a little more obvious than his elbows were, so gonna do that. There we go. We'll get his other side of his cheek. And I'm gonna actually move so that my paintbrush can go sideways over those. There we go. Instead of just dabbing them on. And then I had to turn them upside down to get the back side of those two. There we go. Alright, pretty happy with that. And then he's got these little tiny ones on his chin. So I'm going to try and grab some paint that doesn't have as much water in it. I really just don't want that to run at all. I want it to go exactly where I place it and nowhere else. So I'm going to just run my brush just ever so slightly over top of those. And then on this side too. Okay. Yeah. Pretty happy with that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, that looks good. I like it. Okay, inside his mouth. So if you look inside of his mouth, you can barely see them, but they've got little tiny teeth in there. So I am gonna get those teeth too with this. So just kind of run it ever so slightly. It's almost like dry brushing. But instead of covering a big surface, again, like we talked about before, we're just covering the tips of those teeth. And I do want to get both sides of the teeth, so I'm going to go ahead and cover the insides of the opposite side on both his top and bottom jaw. There we go. And then I will turn him over. And I'll do the same thing to this side. So I'll get this outsides of these ones. Oh, a little too much on that guy. And then the outsides of the bottom ones. And then the insides of the opposite side. And the insides of the top opposite side. Okay. Alright. Here we go. So you can kind of see his little tiny teeth. If you've got him in person, you should be able to see those pretty well. So awesome. Okay. We are going to do the dreaded eyes next. So he has slightly bigger eyes than a humanoid miniature does, but still not very big. So it's going to be a challenge, and that's okay. Challenges are good. So keep in mind that you have all the colors that you need to go back over things if you mess up. So it's okay. I am going to take my tiniest brush that I have and use it to do the eyes. So a common issue that comes up when you're doing eyes that are so small with your paintbrushes is that a lot of people will buy paintbrushes that are a small tip. So it'll be a small tip like this, but the bristles will be about half that length. And the issue with that is that it doesn't hold very much paint. And so even though it seems like you don't need very much paint for the eye, in order for the paint to stay wet enough from your palette to your miniature, you need more bristles. Like, you need to have thicker bristles that can hold that paint inside of them. And so that is a challenge. I know it sounds kind of weird, but it's something I had learned in a class from a professional one time, and I always think about that. But anyway, so we do want a thinner brush, but we also want it to be a little longer so that it can hold enough paint for us to keep it wet by the time we get it to our miniature. Okay, So I'm gonna just dab this in water, just barely, ever so much, and then touch my white paint. Notice how much I have on there. It's not a whole lot. It's kind of my tip there, but the bristles on here are enough that it should be keeping that paint wet. And then I'm going to stabilize myself, put my miniature in a position that allows me to just drag my brush over its eye. So just touch and drag until I feel like it's well coated on there. Okay, there's my eye. I'm going to roll him over. Find a good angle for myself. Ugh, it's hard with those wings. Okay, I am, just to be safe, gonna clean my brush just in case that paint had dried out. Add my white back on. Okay, and then do it again. Oh, I had too much water in that one. Okay. Drop and drag. Okay. So I did have a little bit too much water that time, but that's okay. It's still pretty decent. I'm still okay with it. So it covered the surface that I needed to cover. So I'm pretty happy with those. All right, so that's the whites. Now we don't want to put the rest in until that is dry. So what I'm gonna do while those are drying is fill in his nostrils. So he's got nostrils on both sides there, and all I'm gonna do is use our darkest color. I'm gonna use this again. For me, it's blue liner. For you, it might be black. Whatever you kind of want to use there. I don't use black all that often. I often will use just like an off color that is almost a black. And so that's why I'm using blue liner, but you can absolutely use black if that is what you like to use. Okay. Right. His nostrils are tiny too, just like his eyes. So I'm going to use the same technique that I did for the eyes on his nostrils, but this time my paint can be a little thinner, and that's okay. So like add more water to it if you want to. It's okay. Because we're filling in a crease rather than trying to cover a space. Okay, so I have his nostril at an angle that I'll be able to just, again, drop in my paintbrush, drag, and then lift. So I'm going to drop it into the thicker part of the nostril, drag it along that edge, and then I pulled right out. And there's his nostril. Alright, now I'm going to flip him over and do the same thing. I'm going to grab just a little bit more paint just to make sure I have enough. Alright. Okay, nostril, where are you angled? Yep, like that. That'll work. Alright. So, drop it into the thickest part. Drag and pull out. And there's his second nostril. Usually I have to do touch-ups, but I'm actually pretty happy with those two. So I think I'm just going to leave them. Something else that I did with my other miniature with this darker color is that I ended up painting his like cheek muscles. He's got these little tiny cheek muscles that he kind of like I think reptiles kind of have them or whatever, but it's like not his cheek actually, but like the inside. And so I kind of wanted to define that a little bit. And so I took that black and just kind of barely, oh, I need some more black, sorry. Well, it's not black, it's blue, but whatever, you know what I mean. Let's get a little bit more on my brush, there we go. Okay, and then I'm just gonna ever so slightly add in some right there, just in the crease of his mouth, just to kind of give his mouth some definition. And then I'm gonna do it to the other side. All right. Okay. And if you get his teeth, that's okay. Just go back over it with the white. It's no big deal. All right. So something you could do if you wanted to, but I'm not going to for this time around. You could go back over that, now that it's kind of that darker color, you could go back over it with the red, because, you know, inside of our cheek, that's kind of the right color, right? So you could go back over that with red if that's what you kind of wanted to go for. I am not going to this particular time just because I'm not really worried about it right now, and I'm pretty satisfied with the blue liner on it, so not super worried about it. It's up to you what you kind of want to do there. All right, I think his eyes are pretty dry, so I'm pretty happy with them. So my next step, also a tricky step, is that I'm going to use my thin paintbrush again, and I am going to use a technique that I was taught by a friend called like sharpening your brush. So you get your brush a little bit wet, and then you take a paper towel and pinch it between your fingers so that it creases here, and then you take your paintbrush and you run it through. And then you turn and run it through again, and you kind of keep doing that until you feel like you have a good sharp point to your paintbrush. And that's what he called sharpening your paintbrush. And so I have used it a few different times, and I really like that technique. So I do that. I'll get some of my darkest color on my paintbrush, and then I'm going to look at my miniature and where is he facing? Like, where is he looking at? Or like, what is he looking at? And then that will help me determine like where I want to place his eyes, and where I want them to be looking. And so I'm going to get some paint on the end of my paintbrush here. Okay, I don't want too much because I don't want it to be a huge blob all over his eye. Okay, so I'm looking. Where is he facing? Where's he looking? Okay, and then I think it's gonna be kind of right in here. And depending on what type of eye you want to give your dragon, maybe you want to do a slit, maybe you want to do a circle, maybe you want to do a little bit of like an oval. Something like that. So depending on what you want to do, if you're just wanting a slit, you're probably going to want to do the technique we talked about before, where you lay your brush down, drag it just ever so slightly, and then lift up. If you're wanting a circle, maybe you just kind of dot it down and just kind of like softly rub in a circle. And then if you want the oval, you kind of do a little bit of both. So just kind of a little soft circles, and then drag down a little bit. So whatever technique you want to use. So you can kind of see my dragon's eye there. All right, I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. And again, I'm going to start where I started last time, where I'm looking at the front of my miniature, or whatever direction that he seems like he's looking, so that I can get the eyes to line up as if they are looking the same way. So I kind of have an idea of where that looks like that's going to be on the second eye. So I'm just going to ever so slightly touch that spot. Not bad. Not perfect, but not bad. I think that's okay. You don't usually look at both eyes at the same time anyway. But as long as they're pretty close, I think people will be okay with it when they're looking at your critter. Okay. All right. So you can leave, his eyes are small enough that you can leave it as just that mark if you'd like. But if you want, you can go back in and add some additional color to it. So maybe I want to use this dark orange color that we created earlier, because it's still pretty wet on my palette here. Maybe I want to use that and add just a tad bit more color to his eye. some more. Oh, my brush has a little thing on it. There we go. All right. Okay, just ever so lightly touch the reddish orange on there. Okay, you probably can't see much through the camera, but he's kind of got a bit of that orangish red towards the front side of that black area. Or blue for me. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm liking that pretty well. If you feel like your eyes are a little too flat, and maybe you want to kind of give them some depth, like I did for this guy. I tried to give them a little more depth, so it looked like he's got some pieces that are a little further out, kind of like our real eyes, our eyebrows and stuff like that. You can take your blue liner or your black color or whatever color you have, and again, I would make sure your brush is clean, sharpen your paintbrush till you're happy with it. Take that dark color. You're gonna want a little more on your brush than when you did the eyes themselves, because we're gonna use more of the side of the brush. And we're going to kind of just ever so lightly go along the edge of the eye. This can be pretty challenging, and I can't get it right every single time, and I'm a little nervous that I'm not going to get it right this time. There you go. Alright, there's a little more on top. He kind of looks like he might be wearing mascara, or she might be wearing mascara, but that's okay. It was worth a try this time. If you try this and you don't like it, just go back over it with your oranges and your blue, or oranges and your yellow, and it'll be absolutely fine. Something else that you can consider doing is running an ink around the eye. If you decide to do that, be very, very careful that you don't get it like in the eye. You only get it around the eye, because being inside the eye, you might as well just do the whole eye over again. So inking can be extremely hard when it comes to the eyes and the face. Gosh, the second one is proving to be even harder than the first one was. I may just stop on it for now. Well, maybe. Yeah. I think I kind of messed that side up pretty well, so that's okay. I'll not worry about it right now, but I kind of got a little too much black on that side compared to this side, so that's okay. It looks all right for now. I can always go back and do it again if I want to. Okay, other details. So his wings are really definitely dry now, so this would be a great time for you if you wanted to go back and do those highlights that we had talked about before, if that's something you kind of want to do. The other thing that I wanted to do on this guy before we kind of put him aside was add in that metallic. So if you decided that you did want to do some metallic on him, like how might you do that without covering the entire miniature, the entire gold dragon in gold, right? So how do you kind of maybe do that? He honestly, I think he looks like a great gold dragon just as he is right now. But if you kind of want to have some fun, if you really like the metallic colors, you can really kind of have some fun with just adding the gold And I probably wouldn't add any water to it. Like, I would just use it as is. And just add that gold as flecks on his scales. Places that I would kind of consider doing that is going to be on his face. He's got these different little scaly bumps. All that great detail that I was telling you about that is in his face that we were so cautious to not cover up. He's got all those little flecks on his face. That's kind of fun, like on his cheek, you know? So I'm just kind of dotting my gold over those areas. I don't know if this light is kind of hurting that view at all. There, maybe you can kind of see that a little better. So where that lighter color is on his jaw is where those flecks are. And then he's got some right underneath of his eye. Just gonna apply some of that there. Maybe a little just on the outsides of his mouth. And you can kind of use a little bit of our dry brush technique that we talked about, where you use the side of your brush to kind of run it along, like we did on his chest down here. He's got some nice spots on top of his head that maybe you want to do that too. Little parts, maybe around his horns a little bit. I like the idea of his eyebrows kind of being a little more metallic. So maybe I kind of want to dry brush a little onto his eyebrows. There we go. The other side. Since we are not adding any water to this gold color, you may end up having to go back to the jar for it, or your palette for it multiple times. That's okay. You may have to just keep refilling your brush. And that's alright. He's got a few more scales on this cheek. Touch up some of those. There we go. Okay. And then maybe on his on some of his muscles, maybe there's some shiny scales on some of his muscles. So we'll just kind of like dot or do small brush strokes on some of those areas. Kind of fun. Maybe we change the direction when we get to his wing. There we go. Maybe put just a couple on the bottom of his neck there. Maybe some on this back leg, on those muscles, where we kind of see that definition at the top. Maybe on his back a little bit. Then if you're using the brighter gold that I have suggested in the link at Tabletop, and it should go really nicely with the yellows that we've used today. If you're just using what paints you have at home, that's awesome. That's perfectly fine. You might try and find a gold that just like works really well with the yellows that you've been using. Alright, I feel like that side looks pretty good. Kind of has a shimmer to it, but not all over the place. Alright, so let's do the other side. Actually, I'm gonna do a little up his front side here too, just to give it some too. There we go. Alright, let's work on his other side here. Alright, so muscles again. I would recommend that you kind of try and mimic your other side. And what I probably should have done was go back and forth between the two sides as I was working to make sure that I was covering the same spots with this metallic color to kind of make him seem symmetrical, to make him seem like it works. Because again, we're not really painting for purposes of, you know, where's the light coming from, and we're not trying to really be cautious of like where he's at in nature and stuff like that. We're more just trying to get him to look neat and for it to make sense in our human brains. Okay. Just a few more places for me. Do this back leg like I did the other side. Having to go back and get more and more paint because it keeps drying on me. This side of his tail is kind of sticking out a little bit, so maybe I have some gold flecks along that tail too. Oh, you know what I didn't even think about? I didn't even think about his back. He's probably got gold on his back if he's got gold everywhere else. So let's give him just a little bit. Maybe these little spikies down his neck, and then maybe just a little bit down his spine. Just a tad there. There's a few more spots on the top of his head that I think I would like to put some gold, so I think I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna make his eyebrows, his gold eyebrows, just a little thicker. And some gold there. And then I think I might do just a little bit on the tip of his nose and his nostrils here, top of his nostrils. Okay. I like that pretty well, I think. Okay. Alright. I think that's our gold dragon. So then the only thing you have left to really paint are these extra two little pieces here. So if you really just wanted your gold dragon, you're good to go. I will give you a few tips on these extra pieces though, to kind of hopefully help you out. So the biggest one that I definitely wanted to talk about was the clear coat piece that comes with this dragon. This can be so challenging to paint, and I honestly have really only painted like maybe 3, I think, of these types of things. So so this miniature comes with this this clear flame, and it goes in his mouth. I think you have to glue it in there, but basically it goes in his mouth, so it looks like he's, you know, breathing fire and stuff like that. And I got started on this one. I haven't finished this yet, but I got started on this one because I wanted you to kind of see what that looks like. And like I said, I am no way an expert at this. I have just barely begun to start to paint them. But there are lots of YouTube videos out there that give some really great advice on them, and they really make them look cool. We're going to try today, but I just wanted to let you know that if you really just want to hear it from an expert, you can Google it. There's some really great things out there. Anyway, so what I did for this one so far was I put red on it, but I made it very thin. So this is going to go back to, I'm going to turn my light back on here. Sorry. This is going to go back to the inking piece. Okay. So when you are painting these clear coats, your first coat, you really just want to be a very, very thin and just kind of like fill in some of those cracks kind of thing. And so I'm going to put some drops of red out here. And I'm going to take my, I'm using my biggest paintbrush here. The middle one still works perfectly fine. So if you have, if you only have the two smaller ones from Tabletop or wherever you get your paintbrushes from, then that's absolutely fine. You can use your middle one. I'm going to use my big one. I just feel more comfortable with it, so I'm going to use this one. Anyway, okay, so I've got my red on here. I am going to add a lot of water to this. I'm going to really thin this out. Okay. So yeah, I really want it to be able to flow. Yeah, that's not even enough. So I'm going to add some more. So it's moving around on my plate a lot, but it's just, it might be a little better. So I'm just kind of trying to check the consistency of the paint. That might be okay. All right. So I'm going to take this and start applying it here at the base of this clear thing, this clear fire. That base part here, I'm not really worried about how dark it is because it's going to be in my miniature's mouth. So I'm okay with like testing this out on it. Okay, this is pretty thin. I think I'm happy with this. So I am going to go ahead and cover the rest of my miniature, cover the rest of my clear fire here with it. So I really want it to kind of sit in those creases, kind of like it's doing here. Okay, so let's go ahead, put that up. There we go. So you'll notice that the see-through is still really showing a lot, and that is absolutely okay. It's actually what I want. I'm gonna set that down so I don't get it all over my fingers. And kind of pull some of that paint around on it. Okay, so I really just kind of wanted to fill in some of those creases and things like that. Okay, I am gonna go ahead and flip it over, do the back side. If you miss spots with this clear stuff, it's not as bad as like your regular miniature, you know, your like the white coated miniatures and stuff like that. Especially if you kind of want some of that translucentness to kind of stick through with you as you're painting. It's okay if you kind of miss some spots and stuff like that. It's all right. So just gonna kind of put that coat on there. All right, and then I'm gonna let that dry. And just like before, it's really just, it's important to let this dry before we go ahead and continue on with adding more to it. So that's kind of why I didn't want to do too much on this tester one that I was working on, is because I kind of wanted to be able to go back and forth with you so you can kind of see as I progress through that a little faster. So, and we have only got, it looks like, about 30 minutes left on this workshop. So I'll try and work through these kind of quickly for you. Okay, so we've got our undercoat on there. We can still kind of see through some of it, and that's great. You'll notice that this guy is, I maybe put on a little thicker, but you can still pretty transparent, or pretty well transparent. So now I'm going to use my orange and my red that I've been using to kind of work through making this look a little more like fire. And if you have to look up what fire looks like, it's okay. I felt like I had to do the same thing. I was like, what's the what's the undercolor of fire? And then, like, how does it change? Maybe you do more painting and things with fire, or drawing with fire, or drawing out fire and stuff like that, or maybe you see fire more regularly, but my brain just was not having it. So I had to look it up and use kind of a reference photo for it. So I just pulled that up on my phone just to kind of give myself a concept of like what I should kind of be shooting for. So I kind of am going to use this. It's already on my palette, so that's kind of nice. I'm not going to have to mix anything because it was when we were doing the dragon's wings. But I have this nice mixture of the orange and the red here. And I am not adding any more water to it than what was already there, because I am going to now do like a dry brush of this darker color. And so I'm going to kind of, this might actually even be too thin anyway. I may have to mix some more that's going to be not quite as thin. So I really kind of want more of this particular color on the top layers than I do on the bottom layers. Okay, you can kind of see it. It's probably hard to see in the video, but I can see where it is coming through a little bit. So that is definitely a challenge with these clear miniatures. They look awesome and I love them so much, but it's definitely a challenge that you are going to face when you're painting them, is that it's kind of sometimes hard to see where you have applied your paints or where things are sticking, things like that. Once you start to get to layering things, you can usually see pretty well the first thing that you do, but then after that it's just really hard because you're seeing both sides of the paint. You're seeing both the paint that's already on the front side and the paint that's already on the back side, plus the paint that you're applying. It's just, it can be really hard sometimes. Alright. Okay, so we've got that darker orange kind of added into some places. Again, I'm just kind of dry brushing that on. Just a little all over the place, really, because we've already got our dark red color on there. So now this is our orangey, fiery color that we're kind of adding in. And then as fire like kind of comes up, it will tend to get more yellow and a brighter orange and some more yellow. So so we are going to move into just using the orange. Oh, my red's kind of seeping all over the place here. We're going to move into just using the orange without anything mixed into it. And because, whoops, totally dropped my paintbrush. Sorry. I'll use one of these other paintbrushes because I kind of rolled over under the table. But anyway, since we kind of dry brushed that on, it's fairly well dry already. So we're going to go ahead and move to this brighter orange color. Make sure you don't have too much on there. And again, I am not adding water to this because I don't want it to seep into the cracks. I want to do the dry brush over top. I am adding some of this brighter orange to the bottom, but not as much, because the bottom of my flame should really be the darker part. So I'm just going to add just a little bit, but not a whole lot. Okay, but then when I start getting up here to the top, closer to the top, I'm going to be adding a lot more. Okay, so you can kind of see where that's starting to come out a little bit more. Okay. Yeah. Then as we layer, it's going to get brighter and brighter, just like before when we were painting the other mini. So a little bit at the bottom and then heavier at the top. A little too much paint on that one. Okay. Alright, just dry brushing it on. There we go. Right, I'm liking that. Wash that color off. And then we're going to go to our medium one here. I'm going to put some more back on my palette just so that I can close the lid to this thing. But again, not adding any water to this. I want it to be thicker. I want it to be that thin. And I'm going to start more to the top on this one, with this one, because that's where I really want this to kind of be heavier. Some of the ends of these little flames that are lapping out from the sides. So like this one at the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and add some of this lighter color to it. Just like a flame would kind of have that lighter color at the ends of each of the little flames that are lapping out from it. I'm just kind of adding this lighter color onto some of those ends that are lapping out from this gold dragon's fire. Okay. Okay. Again, I'm just kind of dry brushing it over, just feather dusting it on. Kind of thing. There we go. Right. So, kind of looking like a little more like a flame. Maybe you want your flame to be a little more orange. You can go back in, and maybe these top parts, maybe they should be a little more orange. So maybe we do add a little bit of water to our orangey color. Make it thinner, and then let it seep into some of this top part where these flames are lapping out from the overall fire. Just kind of fill in some of the creases and things. Yeah. Alright, let's do, oops. To the back side here. Alright. Now in some of these places, and you may notice this, or maybe you can't quite tell, but I can tell that I've kind of lost some of the brightness of the yellow that's overlapping this. But you know what? That's okay, because we have an even lighter yellow that we can add to this. So I'm gonna go. All right. So there's kind of the start of our flame. I probably am gonna need to let it dry just a little bit before I add that next bright color of yellow. Probably just gonna add that to just the very ends of this thing, but I'm gonna use this really light highlight color that we kind of used on our dragon before. That's what I'm gonna use for those tips when we kind of get to that point. So I know we are really getting close to time for the end of this session. I'm going to set this aside just real quick while it dries and talk about the treasure pile that that came with this miniature. So I had you before put that dark coat over the entire thing, and that is really a great color for the silver to go on top of. It's okay for the gold color as well if you're kind of wanting like a darker gold color. And it's okay for the copper color as well, but the red is kind of a really nice color for the copper. Or you can kind of mix the blue and the red, or your black or whatever dark color you're using with the red. If you are using the blue liner like I am, it'll give it a slight a slight purple tint, but really not too bad. So, anyway, it still looks really nice with the copper. So anyway, so you can kind of do what you kind of want there. And for this one that I kind of was playing with earlier, I did a gold on this side and a copper on this side, and then I did some silver, platinum, whatever you want to call it, over on this side, just to kind of see the different things and how they looked and things like that. This thing has so much detail. It's super duper awesome, and I really love it. And I'm not finished with it yet. This is just kind of how far I got. And like I had mentioned at the beginning, so I had also on this one put all the dark the dark color on everything. But I really didn't like that for the crown. I felt like that was too dark for the crown. So I used my white. I painted the crown itself white, let that dry, and then put the gold back on top of it. And then it was just this nice, like, shiny crown. Then it looks like there's like this jar here as well, and so you can have a lot of fun with that jar. You can paint it like a totally different color, like maybe you want to paint it purple, or green, or whatever you might want to paint it. I had painted it red just because that's kind of what I had for this particular palette that I was using. And it can also be really fun because you can use, let me get my tiny brush. Alright, so if I get my tiny brush out and I do my sharpening, there we go. Alright, so on this red one, maybe I take some orange on there. Okay. And maybe I do a little design on it. And so maybe I kind of want like a little loop on it there. Maybe like a dot here and a dot here. The paint's kind of getting a little too thin. I need a thicker paint. When you're freehanding stuff, having thicker paint works a lot nicer. You don't want a lot of it on your brush, but you also don't want it to be watered down because that can really be a challenge to use. And then maybe over here I have like a I think this brush might be almost too thick even to do some of these really fine details. I would almost want a thinner brush to do those. I know some people that can use just a thick brush that they have done their sharpening technique to, that like it's just crazy how much they can do to it, but with a big brush, but that is not me. Let's add some white in here. It'll make it pop a little bit more. go. And add in some orange. So just like I did with my crown, I added some white in so that my orange would pop a little better for me. There we go. Alright, and then maybe I put like some kind of weird little, oh, that's a little too close, sorry. Little trident symbol on it or something. There's a little design on that side. Things like that. So you can have a lot of fun with it. On the crown, maybe the crown has some jewels in each of the little, you know, prongs. So then maybe you add some color into the, like a little dot of color on each of those prongs. Maybe it has some silver in it, so we take our silver and kind of go into that. So many different things that you could do with that. It can just really be a lot of fun. You can really be creative with it too. Real quick, before I finish that talk up, I think our fire is fairly well dried up. Okay, so I have some of that super light yellow over here. Again, no added water, just doing the yellow by itself. And I'm really just gonna touch on some of those highest peaks of this fire. I almost have too much paint on there. There we go. I'm gonna touch on some of those highest peaks just to kind of help bring them up a little bit, brighten them up. There we go. Maybe that moves it too far away from the orange for you, and you want to go back down to the medium yellow, and that's okay. Just, you know, whatever you like, whatever you're feeling good with. Just wanted to get a clean brush there for a second, so I just kind of, it's almost too much again. You might have to go back and forth a little bit until you find a good flame color for yourself. So, and maybe it's you use this yellow to lighten up some of those areas and go back through with that yellow, that middle yellow again, like we did with our dragon. Lots of techniques that you can just reuse in different areas with what you're working with. It'd be fun to just try different things, see how things work, see how your colors work together. There we go. All right. I think I'm pretty happy with that. So that's fun. All right. And then, like I said, I think you're going to have to glue this in. But in order to get it to actually stay in place in the dragon's mouth. So I think you end up having to glue it in there like that. But that's kind of neat, right? So that's fun. It'll stay, but it rotates. All right, cool. So that's our fire. And then our treasure, we're probably not going to really have enough time to actually wrap it up, but just to kind of give you guys some ideas about like how I would tackle this. So I've got the treasure kind of the way that this undercoat to it. So now the question is, how do I want to tackle the detail on this? Do I want to try and paint every single coin? And I have done that before on pieces, so it's not impossible. It just takes a long time. So you can do that, But what I did with like this one, and I wouldn't probably call this one finished, but I think it's in a good place at least. What I did with this one was that I actually took some of my paint, get a new spot here. Nope. This one's having issues with my pen. Alright, clean that out. Alright, if you're having issues with your paint, be careful when you're opening it up and stuff like that. It can be dangerous. You stab yourself with whatever you're trying to open it with. So, okay. So I got some mine's called Aged Pewter, whatever silver color you kind of have. I really like this darker color, but maybe you like a lighter color. And a lighter color might actually be nice. Oh, actually, now that I think about it, we probably, because this pewter is so dark, we might want to start with this white as a dry brush and then dry brush on our silver. So just real quick, let's try and do just dry brush that right on there. Sorry if you could hear my dog. Okay. So just dry brush that right on there so you can see where it's already started to lighten that up. And then I dry brushed it on pretty light, so it should dry pretty quickly. Then that should allow me to now go back, grab my silver, and then dry brush that on right over top of it. And it will just give it that nice sheen color. Now you could probably do this thicker than what I'm doing it so that those really pop more and kind of show more of the silver and less of that undercoat that we have on top of it. But it still looks pretty nice. And then if you ever wanted to go back in and do a little more detail, you can do that sharpening technique that we talked about and then grab some paint on there and then go in and just touch up those areas that you feel like, there's a line there. I feel like that should have some color on it. It shouldn't just be that undercoat color, you know, things like that. So there's that. Maybe you want to have a few pieces in there that are actually gold. So maybe you go back in with your gold and touch up some of those pieces that you're like, nah, that should really be a gold piece sitting there. I think I had too much water in my paintbrush, so it's kind of running a little bit. But if you don't have water in your paintbrush, it should stick straight to it, as long as you don't add any water to your gold color. So really, we're just using that dry brush technique to cover a large amount of pieces in a short amount of time. Like I said, you can always go back in and do one at a time, and that's absolutely fine. If you think that you might try and do like a cover of the whole thing in one metallic and then go back in and add a few pieces of other stuff, like all silver, and then add a couple of gold pieces, I would probably do the silver first and then go back in and add that gold on top of it. And always keep in mind of that technique of being able to add white to something to make it pop a little bit more. So if you've got all your silver on there and then your gold, maybe whatever gold you're using is kind of a darker gold than what I'm using, maybe you need to add some white to a few areas and then add the gold on top of it to really help it pop and help it show. So that's kind of how I would suggest two different techniques to tackling like a treasure pile and things like that. Stuff that really has just a lot of this great texture on it. It's fantastic just to get in there and just do this really nice dry brush over it. And it really just grabs those creases and just really shows that detail and kind of gives it some more depth. So anyway, so that's how I would kind of tackle that piece if we were going to paint all of it today. Unfortunately, we didn't get to the actual treasure itself. But we did finish our dragon, which is awesome. And then we also finished our fire. So our dragon can actually breathe fire. So I hope that you really enjoyed this session. Thank you all so much for participating, for following along. I think that the link on where to get this dragon from Tabletop, along with the paints that I used today, or at least colors that are basically the same color as what I used today, there should be a link in the chat that you can get all of this from Tabletop Gaming if you'd like to. I believe this video is going to be posted again later, either this weekend or possibly some other time that you can follow along again and actually paint the dragon if you didn't have it with you today. Thank you again so much for Tabletop, being able to help supply these and run all my behind the scenes stuff. It's been so wonderful. And thank you for GameFest, Midwest Game Fest, for allowing me to do this with you all. I love painting so much, and I really appreciate your guys' time. If you did paint along today, or you're watching this video later and you paint the miniature, I would love to see your miniatures. It's so much fun to share that kind of stuff. You can find me on Facebook at Andi Dieckman. So just Andi and then Dieckman. And you can find me on there. Share anything that you have with me on there. That would be great. I love seeing stuff and what people are working on. And then if you'd rather just email me pictures and not do anything on social media, my email address is just my last name at ucmo.edu. So Dieckman at ucmo.edu. All right. Thank you guys so much. I really just appreciate you guys so much. I was. Oh. Are you sure? Oh my gosh, I don't feel like it. That was your fault though, was it? That was just like weird technology things. Yeah, whatever. Well, I appreciate you, because I mean, I would not even be able to begin to do what you and Laura do. I have no idea what the heck you guys are doing behind the scenes. There you go. Aww. Yes, all that. I appreciate that so much. I do have a lot going on tomorrow. the screen share in. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.